are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me as usual, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm in like an altered universe right now. What are we doing today? You know?
No, we're back. And when I say we are back, it's got a little more pop on it than it usually does because it's been a little bit. To pull back the curtain a little bit, I had some technical issues, and over the summer, there's not really a whole lot going on, so the priority wasn't super duper high. But you know, I got myself a little new laptop here, and we're getting ourselves a show out.
So I want to correct one of the things you just said, because usually there's not a lot over the summer.
You know what?
And then you live in the social media universe that we live in, which specifically focuses on this hockey team, and it doesn't feel like there's any breaks. I don't know if I don't feel like I did and I didn't at the same time, and sometimes I asked for one when
first of all, for the record, you should just take a break from Twitter every 2 weeks, just as a normal, sane human being.
I'll pull back the curtain. Part of the reason why you don't see me on there typically outside of game time and like actual news is because I don't sit on it all day.
And that's probably a good thing.
Well, it's not even I don't sit on it all day. Here's what it is. I'll go on and I'll maybe read stuff for a very short period of time and then get kind of tired of it because I'm tired of the same rhetoric every day, and then leave like, okay, I really quickly checked and nothing happened in the rest of the world that warrants a response from me. Like no hockey news, nothing that was crazy. Okay, I'm logging back off.
Yep. Check in, get your news,
I'll
get
check
out.
in. And that's that, pretty much. Like I do the same thing, and that is not a Twitter X exclusive thing. That's pretty much all the platforms anymore. I get more entertainment out of Instagram reels and watching just pointless crap than I do reading like what people post on Facebook or Twitter X or whatever.
Oh yeah.
That just becomes stressful and tiring in a matter of 10 minutes, and I don't need more stress in my life.
Right. You're already following the Phillies.
Fair.
All right. So speaking of, there has been a lot of news this summer. You mentioned it there a little bit, and we're going to dive into it. Before we do that, follow us on our socials at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_media or Kevin_Durso. Follow us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. So, okay, diving right into it. I think we start kind of chronologically from where our last show was. Mm-hmm. And on our last show, we got word that Matvei Michkov was coming. We got word that he was on his way, or, that we vaguely knew that definitely at some point he was coming. And then about 3 days after our last show, boom, he pops up at the airport with Danny Briere carrying his stick.
No, that didn't happen right away.
Was it not? I thought it was.
No.
It felt like it was pretty right away, to be honest.
No. So what happened was that we did the show the Wednesday before the draft. It was I had just come back from vacation. So this is how I remember it. We waited it out for quite literally, and I'm not. No, what you're thinking of is we waited for the Stanley Cup final to be over. The Florida Panthers won the cup on Monday, and Friday we were watching the draft because there was literally no gap. So
very strange.
And amid all of it, by the way, like the Michkov news of that he's coming over anyway dropped on, I believe, the same day as Game 7. So it was like Game 7's going to happen. Michkov's coming. There's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about with this in and of itself.
Sure.
And then the whole offseason.
Also, there's the draft and the offseason and free agency in 4 days.
Right. The whole main bulk of the offseason is going to happen in the next 7 days, basically. We're going to get to draft period. The draft is going to happen over the weekend. July 1st is right after the fact. I think July 1st was the Monday after. So it's like, hey, by the way, free agency is right hot on the heels of the draft too. And then what do you get? 5 days before it's pretty much all over?
Right.
At least the frenzy
everybody's looking to get to the beach house.
It feels like it. Yep. And believe me, there's a lot of things, and I'm going to pull up our new best friend in this case, now Puckpedia.
Puckpedia.com. New cap friendly.
Essentially, because that will actually have the chronological, I didn't write in my little notes over here because the notes I have for this show started when we were on track to do a show the Wednesday after free agency opened or something. And then we never really did that show. And
right.
And I didn't, like, as I wrote down, like, all of the things that have happened since then, I didn't really date them per se. So I actually want to get, like, some of the dates in order, because I want to kind of see, for, like, refreshing my own memory too, of, like, what the busy period was for the Flyers, like the most busy period was in terms of, you know, like, obviously draft weekend was a busy period. It just is. And the Mishkov news was what it was. But, like, to your point, you just went, Mishkov came over like 3 days later. We saw something at the airport. You know when Mishkov came over, truly? It was like July 23rd.
Was it really? It took
that
long. Okay.
Or it was at least because it was a little earlier than that, maybe, but it was like,
it has to be earlier than that.
No. Okay, I apologize. July 25th was another significant moment of the offseason that everybody was waiting for the shoe to drop on. Pretty much, we actually touched on it on our last show somehow. Like, it was the one other big piece of business.
Was that the Travis Konechny contract?
Yes.
Okay.
But Mishkov had been introduced.
We'll get into that in a minute.
So Mishkov, I think, had been introduced like a week earlier. So it was like July 18th-ish or something like that.
Okay.
Because it was 2 days or 3 days after the press conference. He was throwing out the first pitch at the Phillies game.
Yep.
And stuff like that. Like,
hilarious. And also that picture at the airport. That picture at the airport. Come on.
Danny Briere, stick boy.
Danny Briere's face, man.
But Danny Briere, stick boy. I love it.
That dude has always been excited for pucks to go into the back of the net, and he knows that this kid's gonna do a ton of it.
Right. What you might be thinking of, by the way, is as part of the typical free agency frenzy period. July 1st was when the pen hit the paper. And there was a contract officially signed. He was not over yet, as far as I believe. Like, he did not show up to the airport and all that stuff until a little later in the month. But July 1st was when everything became 1,000% real, because it was contracts done. For a week, it was, well, he's coming. We have to assume, because that's what the intention is. But you can't say anything about that with any certainty until it actually happens. And now obviously he's been making the rounds, and
by the way, he is the current betting favorite to win the Calder Trophy.
Yeah, he also, by the way, so they just put out a list fairly recently of the players who are going to the rookie showcase. He is among them. Yep. So is Ivan Fedotov, which is hilarious because he's a 28-year-old rookie showing up to the rookie showcase. I love
the old Artemi Panarin treatment. Feels like it.
Little different because he's a goalie, but nonetheless.
Well, Artemi Panarin didn't spend a year in the Arctic Circle, so. All right.
Actually, so never mind. I'm okay. Oh no, okay, that was the first pitch. Never mind. So wait, I might have been right actually. Did Mishkov show up? Yeah, Mishkov had his introductory press conference on the July 24th.
Wow.
So he had showed up the day earlier.
That long. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I suppose starting chronologically, we should discuss the draft.
Yes, the draft was really the first order of business. I'm checking to see if there's anything else that predates that somehow that we would have missed. I don't really see anything, to be honest. Like, we did shows.
There was not.
No. I'm saying we did shows involving this. Like, we did a show, and Adam Ginning had signed a 2-year extension. That was June 17th. We did a show.
We did a show between the end of the season and the draft, and there was only, like you said, 4 days in there, and we crammed a show in, and there really wasn't a whole lot of time for other news.
Right. So the draft.
Moving to the draft, the Philadelphia Flyers originally held the 12th selection in the first round. Regardless of whether you like the pick or not, they move down one single spot. They still get their guy. They add a third round pick. Now, you can say, like I said, you can say what you like about Jet Luchenko or other players that they maybe should have stayed at 12 and drafted. Yeah. But if that's your guy, moving back one single spot, getting a third round pick for it, that's tidy little asset management.
It is for that purpose, correct? Like, if you're trading back because you have,
I want to phrase it the way I said, right?
Exactly. Well, because there was one player was going at 12 and one wasn't. So if you weren't focused on need and you were sitting here saying, okay, or even if actually you were focused on need because you say, I don't want we have defensemen. I don't need to take a defenseman. So I'll drop back a spot, add a pick, and then still take what everybody perceives to be the top center on the board. Good asset management.
Yep.
It's when you kind of go out of left field and pull a guy that people weren't expecting to hear.
People had in the 20s or 30s, and you take them at 13.
Right. And you take a guy that's going to be clear upside play. And
Sure.
I believe one of the things that I phrased to you in the group chat that we have is it's a pick that works on going for the upside play when you have the Mishkov to go in front of it. Like, you
as
can
a little bit more of a sure thing.
Well, like, you can live with Oliver Bonk is a huge upside play. We also got Matvei Mishkov at 7. So take an upside at 22, go for it, because 7's the stud. Well, there's no stud in front of 13 this time, you know?
I do think through 2 drafts, and obviously we'll talk about this as we go a little deeper here. It does seem like Danny Briere is a bit of a take a big swing in the draft kind of drafter. He's willing to take guys who have maybe a little bit of a higher ceiling, but also maybe a little bit of a lower floor. And obviously it's one of those situations where if the risks pay off, they can pay off huge. But when they don't pay off, they can be a little disappointing. So obviously I'm not, I don't know where Jet Luchenko is going to lie, but we'll see.
Well, the problem is in comparisons, right? Like, if you can look at, and I'm not even taking the 2 guys that we're going to bring into the picture that go around the Luchenko pick from two other teams. You end up living in this comparison world where it's like, if Jet Luchenko has an upside and a ceiling that equates to, and I'm just throwing it out there because I know what kind of reaction this gets from people. If his ceiling is Scott Lawton, then the fan base goes, they really need another Scott Lawton? No, they need higher than that. Right. So take the guy who's a more sure thing, right? Like, right away, one of the things I brought up about this pick is Luchenko immediately becomes to Zeev Boyum and Konsta Helenius, the 2 guys who go around him. He immediately becomes to those guys what Cam York became to Cole Caulfield. Well, you didn't take that guy. So I'm always going to compare that pick to the guy that went directly after you picked him.
Okay.
You had that shot. He was there. And in Luchenko's case, and kind of in York's case as well, because in York's case, they traded back once also. You know, they could have taken anybody at 11, decided, let's trade back. Everybody thought, oh my goodness, they're passing on Cole Caulfield at 11. They drop to 14 and wait and sit there 2 picks later and go, he's still there. Look at this. That's a genius move. And then they still didn't pick him. And you know what I mean? And now immediately it became that. Like the reason why I'm bringing that up.
I was screaming for Joe Veleno with the pick that ended up being Jay O'Brien. So,
well, I was thinking about like what instead of at 11, when you don't take Cole Caulfield, York gets compared to Caulfield because Caulfield was the very next pick. Caulfield went 15 and York went 14.
No,
but you can also look back and go, Matt Boldy went 12. Like, that was there too. Could have had that.
Yeah,
we don't bring it up. We don't bring it up near as much because the focus was on once it got to 14, that was your decision. And everybody was thinking Caulfield anyway. So nobody paid attention to this other guy. Like, now it looks the way it does. Look how good of a player he is.
Sure.
But and there were people who maybe wanted him at the time. I'm not saying that, but a lot of the focus was Caulfield. So when Caulfield still made it, it was like, well, now they can still pick him, and they traded back. What a great decision. In this case, and that's why I'm saying in this case, you have the same situation. Boyum's the one who's there at 12, who goes 12, and you traded out of that slot when you could have just taken him. And then you trade back, and everybody's thinking it's Helenius, and instead of Helenius, it's Luchenko, and Helenius goes with the very next pick at 14.
Yeah, and that's they're always gonna be compared, but at the end of the day, organizations will make picks for need, whether they should or not.
Well, and I like one of the other parts that I add is whether it's fair to Cam York or not, and the same thing goes for Jet Luchenko at this point. Whether it's fair to the player that you're indirectly compared to the guy that went after you, are, because it's just the way that we work things like that.
That's how the human brain works.
Sure.
Well, who was right after.
Yep. So that now I'll admit, and by the way, early indications are Luchenko was a late riser in the draft rankings. His development camp, he looked like he had a solid all-around game.
He's going to be a huge leader for the Guelph Storm.
what I think is more important than whatever he does for Guelph is that he's going to get a lot of attention from junior type things.
Oh yeah.
You know, like you think of summer showcase type stuff, you think of World Juniors, he's going to get some attention and you're going to put a lot of focus on him. And that's why I said it kind of falls in line with the bonk pick of like,
yeah,
you're going to be, what's the word? Again, patience is the word with this. It's good. And that's not a word that, and we'll get to that later, but it's not a word that people necessarily want to hear. That was a surprising to me. Like the drop from 12 to 13 was a little bit surprising to me. I don't know that I fully was expecting a trade there.
Well, you want to talk about patience and also another trade.
Well, that's where I was getting to the next trade because
the Flyers,
that was totally predictable.
The Flyers traded down again, and in fact, they traded so far down that pick pushed all the way back to next year. The 32nd overall pick was traded to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for their first round pick next year.
Correct.
So basically, unless the Oilers win the cup, it's an upgrade. It just takes an extra year.
Well, and I was going to say the condition on it, I believe the condition on the Oiler one is top 12, and then the Avs is top 10. So you've got two other first round picks now where the conditions are miss the playoffs by a ton.
Sure.
Maybe
for teams that are not going to.
Right. Or barely miss the playoffs and somehow or other win a lottery spot that jumps you back into the top 10.
No, the Flyers probably have.
Right. No, I'm giving you the two very unlikely scenarios that doesn't qualify.
Most likely the Flyers end up with like 24 and 29.
Right. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, let's put it this way. One of the benefits you have from those two picks is that it's Colorado and Edmonton, and they both play in the same conference. So one can be no worse than 30, and the other can be no worse than 32. So one of the picks could very well be a lateral move 32 to 32, and the other could be, no worse than, 30th or what? Yeah, right. 30
with a little bit of time investment on that one, but still,
right. Yeah, but you got to wait for the results. You're right. Like,
regardless, Danny Briere has shown some patience and has continued to show patience and will theoretically make that pick in the 2025 draft.
We're all talking about it like it's assumed at this point. So
well, and at some point, and we'll talk about this as we get a little further into the show and the roster and all that. But at a certain point, what's better, a 28th overall pick or like a second line winger? And like those are conversations obviously we can get into as, like I said, as we get a little further in. But what I'm saying is those pieces may be prospects that get drafted and they may be trade pieces, right?
All on the table, but I'll just give you my read on it because it's pretty well assumed. Like we said, it's pretty well assumed. You're going to have 3 picks. One wouldn't be worse than 32 again. The other would be at least 30 or higher. So there's a distinct possibility, depending on how things go, you could have 3 picks in the range of say 10th to 28th.
Oh yeah,
if your pick and then these other 2.
Well, sure, and if things go ideally, those could be picks 11 and 13. With the protections, those could be picks 11 and 13 if disaster strikes.
I'm thinking way less of guaranteeing it that way and more.
Yeah, of course.
They have a good pick of their own, like in a decent enough spot, and then you sit there and you go, okay, into the 20s, you have 2 more, and that plays a little bit better for you. Obviously, like you have more options. Right. It's clear that they're placing a ton of value on this 2025 draft. You've now stacked yourself up with, and this is all within the last, in the first round, you have your own pick and you've added 2 picks within the last 6 months because you got one of them through the Sean Walker trade. And then you got Edmonton's at the draft. So you got Colorado's for Sean Walker and you got Edmonton's at the draft. And that happened spaced apart by 3 months, realistically.
Right.
Then go into the second round. You have your own pick. You have Anaheim's pick from the Cutter Gauthier trade.
And that's going to be a good one, by the way.
Probably. And which, by the way, you also did not add until January of this year.
Yep.
And you couldn't say that you had a third second round pick, but you now officially have Columbus's because they had to decide that at the draft as well. So you walked away from from draft weekend with, at the very least, 2 first rounders in 25 and 2 second rounders, and now know for sure 3 second rounders and 3 first rounders probably.
And there's a real chance that the Flyers have 6 picks in the top 40.
I played a little bit more conservative and said top 40 and said top 45. But
yeah,
but all three,
but that's
all three
that's probably based on the Flyers more than anything.
If it happens, yeah.
Like Columbus and Anaheim are bottom 5 teams, and I don't think either one of us really expect that to change this year. Maybe Anaheim's kids finally start to take a step forward and they finish 23rd or whatever. But like they're probably not they're probably a bottom 5 team.
Yeah, but like,
those are really good picks.
No, they're really good picks. Here's what I'm trying. Here's kind of where I'm trying to get to add to what you're saying. Like, yeah, some of those players could take steps. You got good young cores in all of these locations, right? Where did the Chicago Blackhawks pick in the draft this year?
They picked first, didn't they? Second, something like that.
I think it was second.
Yeah, it was second.
Right,
you're right.
It was second.
Sorry, this summer.
Did they did they not have the first overall pick a year earlier and add some generational talent? And what happened this year with him? He had a great year. He was the Calder winner. I get all that.
Sure.
But what happened? He took a hit toward the head, fractured jaw, out for a little while, right? Yep. All it takes to any of these young kids that you think are going to make an immediate impact is one guy go down and it can affect your whole lineup for a while. And you might be playing for a little bit. Like, look at what Anaheim did last year too. Anaheim had Leo Carlsson, great player, had a great season, but they kind of managed him a little bit. So he didn't play all the time. And that could be strategic in the sense that we're not there yet. So lose a little more guys and we're going to take this guy out and call it management. Maybe that's a better way of, it's management's a better way of saying it than tanking. I get that. But, or is it just that simple where it was what we think is best for his development is not playing 82 and playing 62?
The real question is, how are the Anaheim Ducks going to respond when Cutter Gauthier picks up a mysterious illness in mid-January?
You are only hoping for that at this point.
Listen, all I'm saying, the week of that game, he will play through the Patrice Bergeron punctured lung just because he knows if he doesn't show up in Philly, it's over.
Sure.
It's over.
Either way. So back to the draft picks.
Yes.
So now you have, like we said, you're looking at probably 6 picks in the top 45 of the draft. So this is the can't miss draft. You have to me, you've got to come away with at minimum 2 viable NHL players that are key to your franchise. Okay. Not even like your number might be more valid for 4 guys who make it.
4 roster players.
Right. But 2 of them have to be like top 6 forward, top 4 defenseman.
If
I doubt you're taking a goalie in the first round, but you get my point. Maybe early second though, but maybe early second you jump and you grab the top goalie with one of those 3 second rounders, right?
Well, right. Well, and another thing that we have to consider is that there is still a season left to play, and the Flyers are very possibly going to be bad again, and are very possibly going to be in a situation where they're selling at the trade deadline again, and they may end up with another pick or 2 in the first or second round.
You know what? I also want to go in and clarify this with it too. I keep saying you need, like what I just said is you need to come away from this with at least 2 viable NHL players that are key to your franchise.
Would you be okay if some of that comes via trade?
Well, exactly. That does not mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you for sure and certain in August, the year before this draft happens, that I think they're taking 6 players.
Sure.
If they do, you're taking 6 players with the intention that, to me, you're getting at least
several of them make your team.
Well, that at least 50% of them are worthy of making the roster at some point. And like I said, hopefully 2 of them are legitimate key roles on the team.
Well, something that you threw out earlier today. If 2 of those players end up as Scott Laughton,
right?
You're okay with that? No, but I think you're not thrilled with that. I'm saying if 2 of them end up as Scott Laughton and 2 of them end up as better
out of 4, yes. Out of 4,
right. Yeah, that is what I meant on that.
Particularly people you take in the second round.
Totally.
Like okay, I got 35 and 39 from Anaheim and Columbus, and those 2 guys made it as third liners. I need to make an impact with my first round picks to get something that takes the top 6 or the top 4 defensemen and brings it up another notch, because that's the only way you're going to move forward. This is like, without even having to think about it. After I watched them make these trades, I sit there and I go, Danny Briere's job is on the line in 3 years, because if that's not having an impact, forget about it. Your whole rebuild is around that right now. What's
about to say, is it too early to call next year's draft a career-defining draft for Daniel Briere?
Not at all. Especially now that Mishkov's over, especially now that you seem like you have an intention on doing this around that year. Like, and we'll get to the reasons for that, but that's it.
Because it's not just the draft. You are not just drafting in a vacuum anymore. You are not drafting in a world where you're trying to put the best hockey team. Like, you are, of course. That is always the goal.
But you're not drafting for 4 years from now anymore. You're drafting for now a lot more.
You're not even that. Not even that. You are drafting around one specific pivot point, and it's Matvei Michkov.
Well, sure, because it directly changed your timeline.
It is whole franchise. When you have Eric Lindros, you draft players who can play with Eric Lindros. When you get Matvei Michkov, you have 1 year to see what he can do, and then you have 6 picks to put guys around him. That is Danny Briere's major mission over the next 11 months.
People who have listened to this show for long enough might know where I'm going when I ask you this question. You'll know where I'm going to when I ask you this question. What's a team I talk about all the time when it comes to drafting? That I think just knows how to do it all the time.
The Dallas Stars?
Yep.
That's where I thought you were going. Okay.
This is your chance at a Dallas Stars 2017 style draft. You've got the capital in the first 2 rounds now.
Go get Jason Robertson.
Do with it what you will. Dallas did, and think about it. Where was Dallas slated to pick that year? They picked third. I know. I know.
They were like 13, weren't they?
Right.
They jumped big time.
The Flyers were 13-2.
You're right.
Dallas was right in that same ball.
They were like 10-3 or whatever. Yeah.
But and I'm not saying that means go win that you're going to need to win winning the lottery, of course, always helps. I'm not saying that.
Wow.
All I'm trying to get at is that that's only one of the pieces that we talk about on a regular basis. Where did they draft Jake Ottinger? Late first. Where did they draft Jason Robertson? Early second.
Early second, yeah.
Make an impact with all of the picks, and do it by the same way that everybody else has to. You've got to be good at scouting, and you've got to know what opportunities to take advantage of. And that's what it is, and then develop them properly.
I wasn't going to mention it, but since the Dallas Stars came up organically, did you see that Rope Hintz suit? Whoa! Have you seen it?
Yeah, I saw your text.
Okay. I did put it in the group. Oh, man, homie looks like a Batman villain. Like, he's gonna come up to you with a coin with only one side on it.
I didn't even comment on it to you because all I could think about was this dude loves him some Rope Hintz. Let me.
I do love me some Rope Hintz, but man, with the slim shady bleached hair and the black and white suit, it's a look, Rope. I love it for you, buddy. All right.
By the way, to continue on the Dallas thread, by the way, would you know where Wyatt Johnston was drafted?
Wasn't he a 3rd rounder?
No, he was a 1st rounder.
Okay.
Probably should have gone a lot higher than he did. He didn't pick. He was drafted in the COVID year, so he didn't get to play. That's part of the reason. But he was drafted 23rd overall.
I said when that draft happened that we were going to be talking about guys in the late 1st round for years to come, and because of the scouting and because it was all so weird, and Wyatt Johnston is one of them.
Okay, here's another one because he's another one who's going to be really good. We can already tell, right?
Okay.
Where did Logan Stankoven get drafted?
Oh, stop. I know. 2nd round, 40 something?
2nd round, 47th overall.
47? Yeah. Yeah.
Just saying. That's what you need. Draft like that. And
if I recall correctly, the Maple Leafs just hired Dallas's head scout from that era. Or one of.
Probably. Sure.
I believe they did. So
I'll grab you one. I'll grab you one more, by the way, because here's an underrated one. And this is before COVID, by the way. So this is when you couldn't lean on guys didn't see guys as often. So people slipped. Where did Thomas Harley get drafted?
Oh, stop. He was like in the 20s, wasn't he?
And first round 18.
18. Okay.
But
He
still,
didn't get all the way to 20.
people like the way that these players fit into that system and that they're working and they're going to be good players, right? Like there's, you don't see people sitting there going, oh, gee, Dallas never got any better by picking in the teens all the time. Really?
Right. Well, and okay,
half of the I just gave you 6 roster players.
Yep.
Taken all over the map. Boston does it too. We use Boston all the time as an example too.
Yep. Well, and someone that the Flyers hope will fit into that mold eventually, moving back to the draft here.
Yep.
In the second round, they do take Jack Berglund, another center from the Swedish league.
That was a now, if I'm not mistaken, because they didn't have a pick.
That was the Nashville.
Right. So they didn't have a pick in the second round because they had moved a second rounder previously. And
no. That was a pick that they had. They acquired an additional second round pick from Nashville in exchange for 77 and the third from Minnesota. They had 51 already for Jack Berglund.
Oh, so you're talking about 50? Yeah. Okay. So
that's the pick they took Spencer Gill with at 59.
Okay, but then I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But my point was that a lot of this had to do with not getting Columbus's pick. That's where I was trying to go with.
Correct. Yeah.
If they would have had Columbus's pick, they were on the clock at 35, I believe.
Yep,
right?
Pretty early in the round for sure.
And instead, they had to wait until 51. They waited out until 51. And then jumped right back in at 59 by using, like you said, actually it wasn't 77, it was 118.
Oh, I'm looking at the NHL.com. The Philadelphia Flyers acquired an additional second round pick from the Nashville Predators in exchange for the 77th overall pick in 2024 and a third round selection originally from Minnesota in the 2025 draft.
Maybe Puckpedia's got it wrong.
I say this might be wrong. Puckpedia might be wrong. I don't know the truth, but
we're still learning where everything.
Frankly, I probably trust Puckpedia over NHL.com. Frankly,
and then later on, they made another trade. Like there was a lot of trading going on. They made a trade.
Oh, yeah. Danny Briere was doing stuff. Like this was his first real draft, right? Like last year, he comes in with 3 or 4 months notice, and he had been in the passenger seat, but he had kind of just jumped behind the wheel. This year, he is fully in control of the car. And it's a different situation, right? Like he knows where he's going and he's planned out the road trip snacks.
They made another trade. They got into the 4th round.
Berglund, by the way, 6'4", 209. He's a left shot center from the Swedish league. He had the most points by an under 18 player in the Swedish league.
He seems like a really nice player.
Right. Obviously, he's a guy in the second round, so you have some expectations there. But if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world.
He's the next one on the list too. Like that's the thing. Like Lashenko and Berglund are probably the two you're going to pay the most attention to, because I think like once you start to get to the Gill pick, it's like a lot more of there's some sort of project.
I'm personally pretty excited about Spencer Gill, but yes, I do agree that he does have a little bit more work to do.
I'm saying from a certain aspect of his game is what I more mean. Like Spencer Gill has other qualities that people are going to think are really good.
Yeah, he does.
But there's aspects of his game that are clearly going to need work before he's ready, and that creates way more of a project scenario than it does anything else.
I mean, he's 6'4" and had 46 points in 65 games as a defenseman.
Right.
Yes, there's work to do. No, it's not a perfect player, but I'll take my chances on a kid like that. I will say, you know who that pick reminds me of?
Who?
Come on. He's 6'4" and he played for Rimouski. Who do you think it reminds me of?
Are you gonna
Sam
say
Moran.
Yeah,
Come on. Well, and
I mean, he's shorter.
Who's a development coach? I think Sam's only 6'5" or 6'6". It's not that different.
No, Sam was 6'6" at least.
Okay. But who's a development coach with the Flyers now?
Yeah, I hear you.
I expect Sam Moran to work heavily with Spencer Gill.
And it's part, and as a result, they're all like kind of part of the conversations and things like that and whatnot. So yeah, I get it. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's just like now we're starting to like beyond those couple of second round picks, we start to get into the territory of like
these are guys that you take a note of and say, all right, I'll see you in a couple years. If you're worth
it's
knowing, then you'll come back.
It becomes it's very, very limited, in terms of like we're not going to sit here and act like we know it's on. They by the end of the thing they didn't have a third.
Come on, you
they didn't have a third round pick.
You want to try to pronounce the Finnish kid's name?
Oh, I've heard how to pronounce his name.
Okay. Ruhonen. Okay.
Ronan or Ruhonen. Yeah.
Okay. So there's Ronan, Ruhonen. Then there's Nolan. I'll kind of blow through these because, like we said, these are guys that are a little bit
Noah
more
Powell.
of a
You're talking about
Noah Powell.
Noah Powell's he was an overage prospect, I believe. Yeah. He's older, so he was
he's basically he's re-entry in the USHL, and
he's a re-entry. So
a little bit more. He's trying to go that late bloomer route a little bit more.
Well, he had because of that. He had probably a more impressive from what I could keep track of. He had a more impressive development camp than others.
Well, I mean, he's just older.
Because he had because he was older.
And he is committed to going to Ohio State, so we'll see how he does at the collegiate level.
Sure, and what does that usually give you? So far, outside of mentioning Gill, who Lashenko obviously is with Guelph as well, so we already talked about that. But like you mentioned Gill and with Rimouski, and but everybody else, you got a Swedish kid, a Finnish kid, college now, a kid who's going to college. What does that give you? Time. They're not immediate. Yeah. They're not get them on the books immediately, sign them to their contracts. Like Lashenko, they didn't think about in line with previous events. Lashenko didn't leave development camp without a contract. I wonder why.
This sort of draft strategy tells me that Danny Briere feels confident in his job, confident that he will be around long enough to kind of see some of these prospects develop. Right. Like I feel like a lot of GMs, their first draft, they're like, okay, cool. We're going to go to the OHL. And then in the later rounds, we're going to go to the WHL. And they all keep it very close, and players they've seen and sure things and guys that their scouts have seen 30, 40, 50 times. And Danny Briere is like, no, we're going to take a little bit of a pick on, Ilya Pautov from Krasna Armia Moskva in the MHL.
Right.
How many times has Danny Briere seen Ilya Pautov play?
In person? Probably not.
Probably never. Probably 0 times.
No, but you have Russian scouts and things like that.
Of course.
You're going to lean on to say, let's go for it, right?
But you know what I'm saying.
Can I tell you what I find kind of fascinating about this draft a little bit? And it's not like it's anything earth-shattering or anything like that, but there was an element for me beyond the first pick that they make on day one. They had 2 first-rounders coming in. They traded the one away, as we already talked about. So they only make 1 pick on night 1, and pretty, what was it? I think it was within an hour, right? Within an hour of the first round being over, it was out there that Columbus was keeping the pick. So now they're not picking.
Quick, yeah.
Right. So now you know that they're not picking until 51st in the second round. So there's a gap there. And for like a brief period, I shouldn't even say for a brief period, because what they did is by the time they were done with the trade to go up and get Gill, there was a gap.
Yeah.
And only because they moved back up to get into the 4th round, they weren't going to pick until I think that 5th rounder at 150.
Right.
Until they moved, or I'm sorry, no, because Noah Powell was 148. So they had 2 in short order in the 5th round and used one of them to get back into the 4th round. But for a while it was, hey, I think I even tweeted that at one point. Get comfortable, because they just picked at 59 and they're not picking again until 148. So get comfortable, because there's 2 whole rounds in between where nothing's going to happen.
The good news is the draft moves quick enough that it wasn't too bad.
Well, no, it wasn't. That's not why I'm saying. My point is that Danny Briere's first draft as GM was like the opposite of what it was for Ron Hextall, when Hextall came in and didn't have a ton of picks to work with. Right. And you ended up with 6 picks that year. That was it. And then all of a sudden, like not all of a sudden, but then what was Hextall's philosophy after that? It was acquire. And they would go through drafts and have 9, 10 picks from
11.
Briere's first draft had 10 selections. And then this year they looked at the draft, but why? Because 23 was supposed to be, look at all the talent that's here. The guy who goes 6th might have gone in the 6th round, might have gone in the 4th round of the typical, of any other draft. The guy who went in the 2nd round, late in the 2nd round, may have actually been a late 1st rounder in another draft.
And what else did we already talk about? The fact that they have 6 picks in the first 2 rounds next year already.
Well, only byproduct of
shifting some of these back into next year.
Because also for a brief period of time, we didn't even factor in the because it was here one day, gone the next. But they got the third rounder from Minnesota for that year too, and it was like now they've got 8 in the first 3 rounds.
Yep,
all probably within the first half of the round.
Right.
That's going to be what? 3? That's going to be 8 picks in the top 100.
It's a lot of high value picks. Yeah.
And that's why you don't really blink too much at the third round with the one extra third rounder is gone. It's like, right. Okay, no big deal. But and I get the part with the with adding the first rounders and maybe pushing back on 32. I get that. Sure. But that's where the clear emphasis comes in. You kind of punted on the draft, and it's like we're not really taking a bunch of guys this year, and we're just gonna set ourselves up for 25.
The other thing again is that this is the first year that Danny Briere has gotten all of the scouting information as the head guy, as the guy who makes the pick or whatever.
When you're saying from start, yes, run it from start to finish,
all the way, right, and. If he looked at everything and said, well, I don't know about this year, but I do like next year. And then that's kind of why the philosophy seems to be to punt things down the road a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then. But again, that you're now putting more eggs in that 2025 basket. And if at this point, I trust Danny Briere because he has given me no reason not to. I'm starting to get a little nervous about how many eggs are in this 2025 draft basket.
Well, sure, because it becomes, and I used when I wrote the article after the first night of the draft about it, because that was already when the plan, like that kind of plan was apparent to begin with anyway.
Sure.
You are now, no pun intended with the draft being in Vegas, but you're going all in on this draft. You're pushing all of your collective chips to the center of the table and saying, that year better be the year that it turns, that you get the big reward at the end for doing this, because you might have Mishkov now, but that's all you've really got that takes, that differentiates your team from what it previously was at this moment. Change that in the next year. Right. And that goes beyond just drafting with all of these picks next year. It could be that some of these picks do set up a trade of some kind. It could be trading in a different sort of sense. Maybe it is a player swap instead at that point in time. Maybe it's freeing up money so you have room to sign a free agent at that point. Maybe that's the year. Whatever it is, it doesn't make a difference. It's just clear that next offseason, that was part of the reason also why I kind of kept, and I'm not going into this part of it just yet because we'll get to where I use this line a couple times this offseason. But that's where I kind of took a step back and felt like I had more break time this time around. Because it was everything that came in was nothing too earth shattering. Right. Just about there was a few, the Mishkov news is obviously massive. You have to jump all over it. And they signed a couple of other contracts that we'll get to that are okay, that's a big deal. But there's not really a whole lot this offseason that you were like, okay, that's, not, it didn't move the needle. That's kind of what I'm going to go for.
I think
it's worthy of talking about, but it didn't really change people's perspective of where it's going.
A lot of people
is going to have, and most people, part of the problem is that most of what we're about to get to as we shift from draft to free agency part is most of it didn't move the needle at a time when a lot of people were keeping an eye out for, are they going to make a trade? Is somebody going to go? And it didn't really play out that way. And because of that, I think, the draft ended. They didn't really, they come away with just 7 picks. The top pick isn't something huge or, it's, this is the difference between Zeev Boyum and Jet Lashenko. Zeev Boyum, people are probably going crazy about oh my goodness, they just got this guy who was sure top 10 material and they got him at 12. That's awesome. Now, instead, you got a guy who it felt more like a reach. Okay, So that's a little disappointing. And the rest of the draft comes and goes. And nobody else, you didn't make a player trade. You didn't go out and, acquire a center or, add to your blue line with somebody that you don't know if you're going to need down the road. Like you just, so let me shift it to the free agency period because I want to run down this list of things that happened. And I think I'm going to purposely leave the last one off the list for a second because
is that the most recent one?
It's the most recent thing to talk about, but also I think it's the biggest one to talk about. So
yep, I agree.
We'll get there because it also we'll get there also because it happened later. Like most of the rest of these were within the first week. Like by the time development camp was over, I think all this stuff was done. So
yeah, it was early. When
free
NHL
agency
GMs love getting their business taken care of.
Sure. As a matter of fact, I've got the dates with it for right now. So let's go with this. So on free agency day itself, July 1st, day, and everything else opens, you are watching. And as you are watching other teams do this, that, like some of the notable ones you're watching is all of a sudden Steven Stamkos, who's been who nobody would have thought they would have seen in a uniform other than the Tampa Bay Lightning, is now going to the Nashville Predators.
That's a weird one, man. That's a weird one.
Free agency frenzy, though, right? Like,
yep.
We're dealing like crazy. There's money being thrown around, and the Flyers, like you're just sitting there. The Flyers are on
cap friendly, still popping off with 3 days left in its lifespan.
Yeah, right. So what did the Flyers do on that first day of free agency? They brought back Alexei Kolosov on a 1-year, $1 million deal. Yep. That was a little bit more expected to me because of the fact that like that was lingering. It was like if you want a guy who's and we'll get into what all of these mean and whatnot, but it was like, okay, if you want a guy who's in the Mark Stahl role this year, Alexei Kolosov's fine. He's kind of like an additional coach in the room. Like, let's be real. This one was a little unexpected though, that Garnet Hathaway got a 2-year extension that doesn't even kick in until after this year. So he's now going to be with the team for the next 3 years.
3 more years.
Now, this is what I find interesting about stuff like that. Usually when you sign an extension, especially if you sign early and had as good of a year as he had in terms of playing to what his role is, you usually kind of get a little bit of a pay increase, right?
A little chunky raise, right?
Like it's usually a little bit more to like satisfy you because you're not going to go to market in your free agency year.
They're locking you up, especially like you said, a year in advance.
Do you know
in this case, almost 2 years in advance?
Do you know what his raise was?
It was like $250K, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. He went from 2.375 to 2.4 as an AAV. That was
25K, right?
Yeah, 25K.
Not even 250K. Yeah,
right.
That is barely a cost of living increase.
Right. So it's not really the money thing of it, but I like we'll get, and I'll stick to the list first of what happened, then I'll do my rundown on it. Also on the first, that was when we already kind of said this already, but that's when pen to paper on Matvei Michkov. The contract was done, 3-year entry level deal done.
Which might be the biggest contract the Flyers have signed in 15 years. Like
it has a potential.
It might be the biggest contract they've signed since the Shea Weber offer sheet.
Possibly.
I'm joking, but anyway.
For a player that you actually got use out of, and I can't even go off of like this is not even the biggest because it's not that this wasn't a signing, so I can't even use that as the example. But I'll go the last signing I remember that had this impact was the guy who just helped sign the contract. Probably was Danny Briere.
Probably. Honestly, this might be the biggest contract signing since Danny Briere. That's insane to say.
The only other biggest player biggest player acquisition I can think of is probably Pronger.
Right. Well, and if you talk about contract signings, right, there is like the Claude Giroux contract. Like, is that
right? But no, but see,
that's different. Acquiring a new player.
Right. I don't think you're talking about when you drafted a guy, sign him, and then you watch him develop into something that's a big deal and you keep him around on big tickets like that. I think you're talking like what we're talking more about is that over level of excitement that something you did not already have is showing up and coming. Because I don't even feel that way about Richards and Carter. Like they were drafted, that yes, they were a big deal to the franchise, but I feel like that was a progression of sorts. When they signed their biggest contracts, they were already known for what they're like. They were already known to be key players to the picture. I need to go out and get a Danny Briere. I need to go and get a Chris Pronger.
The only other name that has popped into my head, and this is a player that I think got a raw deal in Philadelphia.
You gonna say Briz?
Was Steve Mason a free agent?
No, Steve Mason, I thought they got in a trade.
That was a
and
trade?
They kept him for a long time. But I was gonna say,
Yeah.
you're gonna say Briz? Like Briz was the biggest.
Well, and that was the other name I was thinking. Yeah, but no.
Briz was a big deal.
Yeah, and then he
wasn't.
Right.
So
okay.
2 days after all of that stuff is done, Bobby Brink 2-year contract. It's a 1.5 mil AAV. That was on July 3rd, July 6th, quite literally right at what was it? Right before they stepped on the ice for the development camp scrimmage at the end, or right after? Like they were able to talk to him after about it, but it was like right before, right after. Lashenko signed his entry-level deal. That was done. That's taken care of. The next day, July 7th, Igor Zamula signs a 2-year, re-signs for 2 years, 1.7 mil AAV.
Yep, that's
so
that's the Russian translation contract.
Well, him and Fedotov.
Between Michkov and Fedotov, and Zamula's stock went way up over the. Well, I'm saying Zamula's individual stock went way up over the last 6 months.
And they all go and hang out at Slava Kuznetsov's house on the weekends. Right.
Right.
Because that's the other guy who's been following them around pretty specifically. So I'm going to leave the last piece off of here, but for all intents and purposes at that given moment, your off-season business was done.
From the second week of July through now, the stuff we're talking about, the second or third week of August, there was pretty much a full month of nothing across the NHL.
It's not even that there was nothing. They didn't have to do another thing. There's no their RFAs were done. You don't really have money for free agency, so free agency was done. The trade market dries up anyway. There's no trades to be had. The draft is over. You really don't have anything else to do, because even with the biggest, and I'll kind of stop the tease a little bit. Everybody knows where we're going with it anyway. But Travis,
they could have traded for Askarov,
but not at that time though. That came later. So it's outside of Travis Konechny and the contract extension that a lot of people, myself included, by the way, thought was getting signed on July 1st or shortly thereafter. It's now been a week, 2 weeks. I don't know if that's getting signed. He's still going to play for them next year.
Sure, he's still under contract for 1 more year
on the contract. But
there's not that extension 12 months early like you come to.
But maybe there's not an extension to be had. And if there's not an extension to be had, maybe business is over for the offseason.
If there's not an extension to be had, then you have to start looking at moving them, right? Because if there's not an extension, you can't let them walk. Not in the state your current franchise.
Well, here's what I'll say about that. It creates doubt that it's going to happen. I wouldn't have gone that direction with it until the season started for sure, because they did the same with Travis Sanheim. Signed his extension on the day the regular season opened in that year. And that takes care of it and says it's not an issue during the playing season anymore. Okay. And you can kind of accept that. Once you play game one, I highly doubt you're worried about talking to the player about that.
Right.
Unless though Danny Briere's done it. He did it with Owen Tippett, got it done like mid-season. There's ways to do it.
Well, and I think the thing is you have to talk to guys mid-season because, let's say there was no extension in place and we were coming into this season and Travis Konechny does not have a contract beyond the season. Every day that passes, every game that he plays, he gets more and more negotiating power because I'm just walking out that open door right there.
Yes.
Becomes just that much more threatening.
Well, and I think that's the difference. Like Sanheim's the closest example I have of that in terms of because you got it done on day one of the regular season, it's really not an issue. But for a while there was a thought that the longer it goes, the less likely it is he's back, because
I could have sworn Travis Sanheim was going to be a Winnipeg Jet.
I hear you. And but what I'm talking about with that is that that's the difference to me between Konechny and say Owen Tippett. Owen Tippett comes in having not really played pro anywhere else, didn't really get a shot in Florida. Here's a team that's giving you every shot. Yeah, let's talk. You're having a really good year. You don't have intention, and he's way younger.
Absolutely.
This isn't about signing your next big ticket. Konechny already had a deal that was 6 years at $5.5 million.
Right.
You don't need you're signing another long-term deal. Not your first long-term deal or, something that was beyond 2 years.
Right. Exactly.
Like a bridge deal. You're signing your legitimate first
contract.
Right. So I think it's a little easier to talk to the player who hasn't signed a deal that goes 7-8 years before than it is, the guy who has had a deal that's 5 years or more. Like here's another one, and it's not even a contract that's up, but when, if you were doing this with Joel Farabee, would it be the same kind of conversation? Joel Farabee signed a 5-year deal after his ELC.
Right.
I'd want another 5-year deal or more, right? And more money, obviously, because that's the natural progression. Konechny's going to have to be coming from the same direction when you talk about that, because it's like, I've played here for 8 years. Right. His first season was what, 16, 17, right?
Right. I mean, at this point, is he the longest tenured Flyer?
He's one of them.
He's got to be up there. Top. Like, it's him and Sanheim, frankly.
Well, no, he's one of the longest tenured from that particular drafting, like the Hextall draft years, if you will. Sanheim's the next closest. Sanheim's a year older, actually. But,
okay.
But longest tenured Flyers, you're jumping over Scott Laughton, Sean Couturier, Sean Couturier. Like, there's longest tenured Flyers, but if you're going back to like that draft heavy focus thing.
Respectfully, Sean Couturier has an asterisk on it because he didn't play for 2 years.
Fair enough, I guess. Anyway, so
you can argue about it with me on Twitter at YWT Podcast.
So, all right, they signed Travis Konechny. I'll get into the specifics of the deal. 8-year extension, $8.75 million AAV. Okay, Let's talk about this whole grouping of offseason signings that happened.
Yeah,
that is the last legitimate transaction of the offseason to this point.
Right.
So, what does all that equate to? What's the one thing that I did not do in any of those? Like, well, I shouldn't say that I didn't do it all, because there's only 2 examples in the group of names I just gave. There's only 2 examples of something that those players do not have in common with the rest. The two players are Mishkov and Lachenko, by the way.
Okay. It was that they were ELCs and they don't really have much of a choice in the matter.
Close enough. It's that they were ELCs in the sense that means that they were not signed previously, as in signed last year.
It was right.
So what does that equate to? They're running it back. Well, okay. There's nothing earth-shattering about these things, or whatever. Maybe, and like I said, maybe the Hathaway extension kind of came as a surprise, so that's kind of worth some further discussion. But like everything else to me was mostly expected. Erik Johnson was always going to be that Mark Stahl type defenseman, veteran presence. Brink and Zamula were the only 2 RFAs that got qualified. I think we did touch on the qualifying offers last show. Because we get into that, because that was when Carter Hart was actually no longer a Flyer.
Can I hit you with a crazy one here?
Sure.
This might be a hot take. This might not be a hot take. We're about an hour in. It's time for a hot take. We're an hour into a summer show. Let's see what we got here.
I'm waiting for it at this point. Here we go.
If the Flyers are running it back, a team that almost made the playoffs last year,
right?
And you're swapping out Cam Atkinson for Matvei Michkov.
Okay.
And I understand the goaltending swap, right? We're talking Hart for Fedotov. It's obviously a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of the in and out of it.
Yes.
So obviously that's probably a little bit of a step down. Frankly, with how good Urson played last year in a role that was far more than he should have been playing.
Right.
And you're running back a very similar roster where a lot of your young players got better. A lot of your old players got healthier.
Okay.
In a league where the rest of the division didn't really get that much better, barring the Devils returning to the mean.
Which I think they will.
I think the Philadelphia Flyers can make the playoffs. Now, I'm not sitting here saying they're going to. I'm not sitting here saying it's a guarantee or a lock. But if this team runs back anywhere close to what they did last year, but Sam Urson doesn't have to play 40 out of 44 down the stretch. Come on, man. And like I said, you're adding a guy who is very likely going to score 25, might score 30, could score 40.
You think Mishkov could score 40 in his rookie year?
Could.
Okay.
I said I started at
I know you said
25
good.
on purpose.
Yes, I know you're lower than higher. I got you.
Score 40.
Okay. Okay. For everybody watching the YouTube channel right now. Okay, so ready? Good cop, bad cop. Okay. Because I don't have anything. I don't even know if I got that word mentioned in my notes today. We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. Yes, yeah, I hear you. All right, so we got past the RFAs. The Mishkov deal was expected and anticipated, obviously. Lachenko, they locked up as quickly, just like they did with they did this with Oliver Bonk last year. It was like, camp's over, you got a deal. Cool, right? So to me, the only two things that were not on the radar were the Hathaway extension and then the lack of anything else, meaning there was no trade. I had fully at that point in time, and this is still true, I didn't expect anything further free agent wise. They just don't have money. They don't have any money to spend, or they didn't anyway during the heart of free agency. They had nothing. They had poured all of their money into they had to anyway pour all the money into Mishkov and bringing whatever was going to be needed to bring back Zamula and Brink and keep that moving for another year. And Johnson, that's another one. That was where it was going to be. The Hathaway extension is money for next season, not 24-25, and it's barely an increase anyway, as we said. So he has 1 year left. Brink and Zamula got slight raises, nothing that I thought was overly earth-shattering.
Essentially bridge deals, yeah.
Well, you know what's funny? I thought that Brinks was higher than I expected by a little bit, and Zamula's was lower than I expected by a little bit.
So they ended up around the same number, which is not in the way you expected.
Kind of. And Mishkov gets his typical ELC money. Johnson got a 1 year veteran deal. It's $1 million. There's no surprises here. So the Travis Konechny extension, which doesn't kick in until next year either. So it's still 5.5 mil this year, regardless of how you spin it. But that was the question. And it was a question of, is it going to get done? Because we started to wait. We started, like I said, we waited, and it's like, oh, you're down to, what is it? It's the last week of July, and 3 weeks have gone by since free agency. And we're like, is this going to happen? Is this going to be a thing that gets done? Right. And, and also too, to hear, both sides are saying they want to, but sometimes plans change. We were very familiar with that. And what would it cost if they do this? And to be honest, as much as I expected this to be the end result, that a contract would get done, that it would be probably relative to the price and the term for sure, but relative to the price. As much as I expected this to be the end result, I nearly thought it wasn't happening this offseason, simply because you get to a certain point where it just feels like it's over. Like, we're not talking about this for the rest of the summer then. Like, it's late July. It hasn't happened. Guess I'm not hearing about this.
I guess it's not happening. Right.
And things seem way more likely to then happen on the cusp of camp starting, maybe during camp, maybe after the season starts, like early on, whatever. We obviously, the day that it happened, we were in the group chat. We were talking about it a little bit. It's a steep price in the short term because it doesn't feel like Konechny's in the same ballpark as Timo Meyer or Sam Reinhart. But honestly, I think it's a positive to get the cap hit under $9 million. The term was always going to be what it is. And let's face it, we're going back to the all-in approach. It's pushing your chips to the table. It's another bet. It's a bet that you're not going to have 3, 4, 5 years of this Konechny extension go by the wayside with a rebuild and still having to get through a rebuild. If it doesn't work, it's going to be one of the primary reasons Danny Briere and or Keith Jones lose their jobs at some point. It just is what it is. Because that's where I stand with it. Like, to me, that was the bigger message than, is Konechny worth the money? Is what the term, whatever. The term was the bigger deal than the money, honestly. The money was going to be whatever it was going to be, but the term was going to tell you, we think that this is going to be
something, a player who is here to be part of this core.
But here to be part of a core that is going like that. If you have visions of competing again, being a contender, you're saying he's part of it. If you're saying he's part of it and you're going to pay him what you're going to pay him, and you still know that you need more than just him and Mishkov, who's only going to be on entry-level deal for 3 years, saying within 3 years, it's go time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It has to be, because like the thing about this contract is I think it's unfortunate, because I think Travis Konechny in a vacuum is probably worth less than what he's going to be making. He's probably somewhere in the 7.5 to 8 range.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of, well, he's your best player tax on it. And probably. I feel like the best player, especially when a team is bad and starting to get good, the best player or the first good player usually gets a little bit overpaid.
Right. And look, what was part of what you were juggling with Konechny to begin with? He's good enough already that you're sitting there saying, is it worth signing him now and speeding up the timeline and saying we're going to have him be part of the core when this is over?
Right.
Or are you going to trade him, try to get more assets, have to continue to build further, and then within 3 or 4 years anyway, as you feel ready to compete again, go, man, we really could use a player like that. A guy who scores 30 a year and who has a chip on his shoulder when he plays and has an edge and seems like he makes a lot of other people better, and has in the last 2 years added a penalty killing element to his game that's been really good.
Well, that theoretically, as the team gets better around him, will only improve.
Right. Now, and this is what I'm saying. Like, this is what made this such a hard decision and a hard one for me to evaluate. That's why I keep going back to, you're taking a gamble, because your gamble is this isn't going to take as long as we think it is. Better yet, Danny Briere, by doing this, is telling you, me, you from the fan perspective, me in the media perspective, and everybody else who would watch it otherwise, we don't think this is going to take that long. Whether you're right about that or not is what it is. You may sit there and look at it as a fan and go, all right, I believe you and I have no reason to doubt you. So let's hope that you're right. And it takes 2 or 3 years and I'm going to be happy about that and excited about it. I am going to sit here from my perspective in the seat where I have to be way more objective about it and sit there and say, I have my doubts. You're missing key pieces. You don't have a number one center. You don't even know if you have a number one defenseman. You've got questions in goal. And sure, when you're done with the rebuild, you'd be looking for a player just like Travis Konechny. I agree. But I don't know if you're going to be asking that question of, oh, now that we're ready to contend, we need a player like that. Is that being asked before this contract is halfway through the extension part, not the extra year on top of it? Like, I'm taking the 8 years after and I'm saying, are you within the first 4 years positioned to be in a conference final?
And if you need this player in 4 years, can you get him for less than 8.75? Can you get a player like this for 6.5? Can you get a player like this for 7? Like,
and that depends, doesn't it? Like, it depends on what cap is, what year it is,
Well, and that's the other thing. So, like, if this was the 2021 offseason and Travis Konechny was up and the team was kind of in the same boat, I'd be really nervous, right? Because we're looking at some cap uncertainty. We don't know what's going on, some weird 56 game schedule, like all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah.
I'd be really nervous about giving Travis Konechny this kind of money for this kind of term. But the fact that you got him for under 9 in a world where theoretically by the end of this contract, the cap's going to be 110.
It could be.
Hopefully, right? Like,
or your hope is incremental. Your hope is incremental increases to the cap every year so that it continues to age well. And I agree.
Exactly. And I think we're in a situation where that is going to be the case.
Well, and for what it's worth, like, this is what I'm saying. For what it's worth, I agree with you, because like one of the players who I look at and I sit there and I say, whose contract isn't as bad as people make it out to be? Travis Sanheim's. Travis Sanheim makes $6.25 million a year, and he could be a second pairing defenseman, and that would actually be fair market value. And when you consider that most number ones are going for 9-10 million.
Exactly.
Like in between that, like, it becomes way more acceptable. And you've got that deal for, at this point now, what, 7 more years?
Something like that. Yeah.
So it's like that is going to age well in a world where the cap increases incrementally over the years.
Well, and
what doesn't age and what ages poorly as some of these go on, the guys who get sometimes $10 million a year, and
right.
It's not going fast enough, so you're limited in space. Like, I don't think, like, I sit there and I look at this and I go, I don't think Travis Sanheim's what's holding you back from doing whatever it is you want to do. What's holding you back is an LTIR eligible Ryan Ellis every year that's never going to play another game. What's holding you back is sometimes, to a degree, it's $5 million, $5.1 million to Rasmus Ristolainen when you don't know whether or not he's actually part of the long-term future or not. What holds you back is having to eat $3.57 million of Kevin Hayes' contract for 3 years, or having to take a buyout of guys that just didn't work out for one reason or another. Buying out Cam Atkinson this year because it was the best thing to do to get some relief. Buying out Tony DeAngelo because it didn't work. Taking on the contract of Cal Peterson and having to eat that money because that is what it is. That's what gets you the first round pick that you want. Stuff like that. That's what's killing you more in the money than worrying about whether or not you gave Travis Sanheim $6.25 million at a time where, yes, the price was high when you signed the deal. And as soon as the cap went up a little bit, you went, oh, wait a minute. That's near as bad as it looks.
Yeah. Yep.
Because by cap percentage, he's not going to be near as bad. Right.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is it's all about
you've got an element of this right now where, like, let's put it this way. 30.6% of the cap, this is Puckpedia again, 30.6% of the cap is going to 7 defensemen. That includes Ellis and Ristolainen.
Right. Right. And a lot of that is Ellis and Ristolainen.
Right. Like I'm saying, that is a significant percentage. So even though Sanheim's making a nice percentage of that too, obviously, he can't be making that, like, he's serviceable. It's not like the guy is a complete dumpster fire on the blue line. When used properly, he's fine.
Let me take a look at something.
So,
do you know off the top of your head, how much does Matt Dumba make?
It's more, isn't it? I'm going to look it up too, because I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm pulling it up here.
He was just a free agent, wasn't he?
I believe so.
Didn't he have to sign somewhere new?
I think he did just sign somewhere new.
His contract is...
I think that's a bad example. I think he ended up with a 1 year. Yeah. He's
2 year. He has 2-year contract. Cap, it's $3.75 million. But hold on. But wait. That's what he just signed to go to. Where's he playing? In that Dallas now. Okay. If I go and try to, like, if I were to go and find, look at what he made with Minnesota for all those years. He made $6 million a year with Minnesota. That was his cap hit. $6 million.
Yep. Yeah. And that was in a time where when he signed that, the cap was 70 or whatever it was.
The cap was he signed that prior to 2018-19 when the cap was still progressively going up. And then 2 years into that contract, everything froze because of COVID. And for several years, you had a $6 million contract out for a player who now you're not getting any extra relief from because the cap's not going anywhere.
The Flyers are advantaged because these contracts and stuff are all being signed post-COVID, right? Like, think about how many teams invested financially in players thinking that the cap was going to go up. And then in 2020, it didn't.
Yeah.
Right. Like, obviously, I think the most glaring example is the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? Like, you put $10 million into 4 players and then the cap stops moving. And
you're left searching for the
playoffs.
No, you're left searching for what to do, right?
Exactly. How do you fill the rest of a roster with only half a budget?
How do you get better defensemen? How do you get a better goalie? How do you do all this when you have $40 million committed to 4 forwards?
Right. So the Flyers are advantaged given that they are doing this all post-COVID, and theoretically the cap should be exploding over the next couple of years, right? We've talked about the ESPN money kind of finally really flushing in. We've talked about the Canadian sports TV broadcast is up in a couple of years.
Right.
Like, the numbers obviously there's a little bit of kind of slingshot effect from COVID, and there's going to be a little bit of a bounce forward from that. theoretically the cap should make some jumps over the next couple of years. Don't worry about Travis Sanheim. And quite frankly, probably don't really worry about Travis Konechny.
It's probably okay. But the problem with Konechny is that for a team, like, you can look at Konechny in one of two ways, kind of from a trade perspective. One way is draft capital. Konechny is going to be one of the most valuable pieces that would be out there if his contract was expiring. If you could sit there and say, we get to March again and he makes $5.5 million, and if you wanted to trade him, you could have found a way to do that this offseason, even if it was clear that you weren't going that direction. How hard is it for somebody to sit there and go, hey, you know what? The free agent market, not all that great. Here's a guy who scores 30 goals, who's got a chippy style of play, edgy style of play, can play in all situations, and then by the way, he's affordable for one more year, and you'll get negotiating rights right off the bat.
It would have been maybe so spicy if they called Toronto.
I hear you. So you have that, but so you had that option, or if it went into the season and you were kind of leaning towards you have to trade him, you could at least eat some of the salary for the rest of the year. So you could cut that contract in half to 2.75 and pay that, have it be paid off that way, right, and just take care of it right then and there, and then it's gone. Like those were two options that you had with it. So you could either trade him for draft capital, or you could have tried to use him to leverage for something bigger. Is there a centerman you want? Is there a defenseman you want that is not going to be had easily without giving up something of substance, right? And that was the question. And there were a lot of people who were on that side in terms of, like, from reactions that I would see with where it was, they've got a lot of wingers. Mishkov's coming in. Maybe now's the time. Do it, go get someone who can play with Mishkov and do it effective immediately versus trying to find it. Right.
Right.
Understood. Understand that standpoint 1,000%. And that's why I'm calling it a gamble, because you're saying we're going to figure this out in the next 2 years, probably. Okay, great. I'd love to know how, and I'm saying I'd love to know how in terms of what money you think you're going to have, because they'll have. So, like, I kept mapping it out at one point in time, like they were going to have money, because, like, to a degree, because I kept sitting there and I'm going, even if you bring back Erik Johnson for a year, you'll get to next offseason, that money just disappears.
Falls off, yeah.
But the two biggest questions you had were, Konechny's going to get a raise. So what 5.5 now is going to turn into, and ultimately turned into 8.75. So let's even just use that figure, that's where it ended up. So that's $3.25 million that you now are paying Konechny to stay with your team that would have been available. Plus the 5.5 just comes off the books anyway. So it is a full 8.75, but it, like,
so it's 8.75, but the cap also went up about $4 million.
I hear you. So just hold on.
But what I'm saying is that's like a 1-for-1, almost exactly like that. The Konechny raise wipes out most of that.
Right. No, I hear you. But just hold on.
Yeah.
So you have the money. Okay. But really the money you're talking about with Konechny, though, isn't even what the raise turns into. It's 5.5. Because you were going to get back the 5.5 that you're paying him this year, and there would have been nothing on the books. So you have 5.5 there. You have, I'm trying to see if there was anybody else. There's nobody else really defensively whose money you were going to gain next year. The closest thing you had to that was either making a trade or choosing this year not to keep Nick Seeler. That was the one way you were going to free up money. So you opted to extend Nick Seeler into this time period at 2.7. Pull that. Let's add 2.7 to the 5.5, right? So let's start, but not really, because the Sealer deal had been done like early enough.
Yeah.
I was factoring in Garnet Hathaway's money, because Garnet Hathaway was $2.375 million that until July 1st was only going to last through this year.
Right.
I factored that in. Factor in the $4 million for Ryan Johansen's contract, which we're going to get to in a second. Factor in the $3.85 million that you have to pay Cal Peterson to bury in the minors that will disappear this season. Factor in $1.67 million that is being paid to Tony DeAngelo to complete the buyout this year. And for a little while, until it was official, and we already talked about this piece of news from the offseason, but until it was official, you were factoring in upwards of $6 million. It was like 5.875, I think, for Cam Atkinson, that you've now cut down to 2.36 this year, and now you have to add. So basically, call the D'Angelo portion of this a wash because the buyout money that you're paying D'Angelo is near identical. It's a little more for Atkinson next year. So call that portion a wash. So go the 3.85 mil plus the 4 mil plus. I think I even just left it at that. I'm even like, keep the 5.5 million from Konechny there, assuming you're going to extend him. So money's going to have to go into it, and just take the 4, the 3.85, and the 2.375, which is upwards of roughly, I believe it was roughly $11 million when it was all said and done, because or close to, right? And like I said, in a year, $1 million to Eric Johnson, add that in, like guys that were coming off the books, so to speak.
Totally.
By the time all of that was done, you had to pay Konechny if you were going to keep him. And you have the following players. Hathaway was one of them who was going to be a free agent, obviously. But you have the following players who are all free agents next year. And most of them are RFAs. So they're all just, even if they're qualifying offers and you get them to accept those or whatever. But we're not dealing with 22-year-old fresh off of the ELC RFAs.
We're dealing with bridge deal, time for the real contract RFAs.
You're dealing with Noah Cates, Morgan Frost, Tyson Forster, who has way better, way more of a resume than some do at 22, and Cam York. And we're talking only $11 million.
I'm gonna hit you with a hot take here.
Go ahead.
You better sign Cam York soon. Like I think Cam York is going to get himself a raise this year. I think he's going to play himself into a bigger contract.
Oh, I don't even think it's about playing himself into a bigger contract from the money point of view. He's getting more of a long-term deal than anybody else would.
I agree. But I'm saying, I think, let's just say the number is 6 now. I think at the end of the season, it's going to be 7 or 8. And like, again, I just pulled numbers out of my head. If he
sticks as a top pairing level type guy, like that it looks like he can play those situations, he's going to make 7 to 8. I
mean, that's fair. I just meant, you know what I mean. The longer you let him play, the more that number's going up.
I'm saying it's based on deployment though. Like if he has a good year, shows that he can kill penalties, show that he can maybe play power play, shows that he's good 5-on-5 and can handle the minutes and the opponents. If you deployed him against a bunch of third pairing guys and he looks really good, I don't think you're asking for him to go from 1.6 to 6 mil. You're asking, you're sitting here saying you're good against the bottom of the lineup. So I'm asking you to go to
work your way up,
3.5 to 4 mil. And it's an increase, but I'm giving you a little more than Nick Seeler kind of, right?
Yeah, we'll say. Yeah.
Versus you played against the best and you looked decent. I'll pay you like that. I think that I agree with you on York. I think York's going to get a lot of usage and prove that he's going to be worth something pretty substantial. I think that Forster's going to get a deal that's going to be pretty.
Oh yeah.
It's not going to sound substantial. Like I don't think Forster's getting like a $7 million contract or anything.
He gets like a 3 years, $4 million.
You're close. Like,
okay.
I was going to go maybe a little less if you're talking. Well, maybe a little less if you're talking about a bridge deal like that, because I don't think Forster would want to not take more. Like everybody wants to take more money, but I don't think the Flyers are offering much more than 4 without going to like
a 5 or a
4 or 5 years. Like, unless the Flyers are going to jump immediately and say with Forster, we think you're that good that we're going to give you the long-term
8 years at 6 or whatever.
That we're going to give you the real long-term deal. Start to think picture, and the follow-up year is going to be huge for this, but he got to 20 last year. Start thinking along the lines of the Joel Farabee contract.
Okay.
5 by 5 seems very reasonable if that's where you think he falls, depending on what he does this year.
I was gonna say, and I think he's another guy that deployment matters, because if he's playing a lot of center, I think that number goes up.
I don't know if they view him as a center to begin with. But
it's
a fair
don't necessarily disagree with you, but the way the roster is currently constructed, he may have to play some center.
It's possible. So okay, well, but actually that brings me to a point about one of the other names I mentioned, because like Morgan Frost. Those are the guys.
It's put up or shut up year for Morgan.
Well,
Frost.
Sure, but like those are the guys that you like it's really funny that you just talked about, we were talking kind of extensively about something that I don't think we planned to, which was the COVID effect or whatever.
Yeah.
PHLY just did this week.
Okay.
As a what if thing. Like, what happens if COVID doesn't shut down that season, blah, blah, blah.
The Flyers are the best team in the league going into the stoppage. Oh,
right.
My heart
and
hurts.
beyond that. But like, Charlie O'Connor made a good point about how, like, there may not have been a team that got more affected by the long-term results of COVID, much more than the Flyers. Like, and the closest and the closest he came up with is exactly the one that you just mentioned, which was Toronto, because you sign guys thinking the cap's going to keep moving and it stops moving. So the $10 million contracts get no relief. Didn't change the fact that you still had players that made you more of a contender than where the Flyers were. So it's quite possible that is like the big effect that it had. But now you just brought up a point that they also made on the show about the idea of you called it put up or shut up time. They mentioned it in a way that was, they're telling you we still need to see more. Like, we're still doing the evaluation process by running it back, right? It's the same guys. Like, there comes a certain point when you sit there and you go, how much more of blank do you need to see?
Right.
Do you know what it is with Cates and Frost though?
Okay.
It's Mishkov's here. We're bringing a high-end talent here. Is the power play better with you on it? Is 5-on-5 better with you playing alongside him directly? Yep. Does this have some
your
sort of
style complement his?
Not even just as a compliment. Does it have an effect on the way that you're able to play now for one reason or another, whether it's playing directly with him or having something change, right? Something change because now he's worth a bigger matchup than somebody else was, and that's the best you're rolling out. If it doesn't happen with Mishkov, it's not going to happen with anybody that you necessarily bring in either, unless you're on the level of Connor McDavid, which let's face
unless
it,
you're talking about really bringing in somebody big.
Which let's face it. Quick aside from the Flyer stuff, NHL news for a moment. We had offer sheets this past week, and you know who didn't sign the offer sheets? The Edmonton Oilers. I wonder why, because they're not going to put out the money like that was being where someone else forced their hand on what kind of contract they were going to sign. They know what they've got coming up. They know they're going to have to pay Draisaitl, and they know they're going to have to pay McDavid. So, sorry, Ryan Holloway, like, you're not worth that number that you're not worth that number that they just put out for when we know Draisaitl's up. And sorry, Philip Broberg, you're not worth that number when we know eventually it's going to turn to, maybe you will be someday, but you're not worth it to us now because we know what we got to do.
And by the way, just mentioning it here, the fact that Stan Bowman got double offer sheeted a week into his new job.
I know, right?
Chef's kiss. Doug Armstrong says he would have done it to his own mother.
I love that quote. I love that quote, by the way. But put that one on a t-shirt too.
You liar! I love you. It was amazing.
That does belong on a t-shirt. So
really
anyway,
good. I would have done it to my mother. Yeah.
So let's move along really quick to two more pieces of Flyers offseason news, and then kind of wrap it all up with like the big scope of where this kind of feels like it's at.
Yeah.
So, and this next topic is going to be where I get to a point that I really wanted to make, because I said something. I think you saw it the first time around. I don't know if you saw it the second time around. I think I just quoted it and then reposted it to, use it again, so to speak. But the Alexei Kolosov thing, the situation that keeps kind of brewing, that keeps kind of lingering, all that type of stuff. Look, I know how this looks and I know how it sounds. Like, you don't like the sound of it because, like, here's another story or whatever about a guy who may not want to play.
Can I tell you my read before you kind of dive
into actually, I would love to hear your read, because it's a very largely driven internet story. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean that it's not legitimate, but there's elements of it that are kind of internet folklore a little bit.
So how I view the situation, as someone who is not nearly as inside as you are, and it mostly knows what's, not to imply that you have any inside information, mostly just kind of know what's going on via what I see online.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a couple things can be true.
Okay.
Right? The kid can be homesick.
Sure.
The kid can have a signed NHL contract. I the human side of me wants to say, oh, let the kid go to the MHL or the VHL or the KHL or wherever he would slot in. Let him play close to home. Let him be with his family. The human side of me wants to say that. But I think the business side of things that says, hey, man, you have a contract, and that contract says you need to be in Lehigh Valley. You signed a contract, brother.
Right.
Get to Allentown. I don't really know what else to tell you.
Well, that's the element where I agree with you, is Danny Briere's right to keep sitting here saying, like, what's the outcome? He's got a contract. Yes, that is absolutely 1,000% true. And that's exactly the way that you kind of approach this from their perspective.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that probably things couldn't have been handled better. And listen, this is, so I don't even want to, don't want to get into, but it's like, you don't even need to have the conversation about usage.
Right.
Because that's a fair conversation, right? The guy shows up and maybe appeared in 2 games and sat behind Cal Peterson for the rest of that, including playoff games.
I don't think that's a valid reason to not show up.
You said you don't think.
I do not think that is a valid reason.
Well, no, it's, you know why it's not? Because assuming that it's handled the right way and there's a communication line that's like, we're not just throwing you into this, you're going to practice a little bit, and like, you're not getting into these impact games, like in the playoffs right now. It should still be appealing to you that the idea, like with the idea of the net is yours next year, probably. Right. But it was like, and maybe it's not. I don't know. Now, granted, the other part of the equation that you got to go into is how comfortable the guy feels otherwise. Like if he feels like he doesn't have anybody to talk to, and it is a foreign situation, then you kind of have to understand that he's going to feel maybe a certain way. Like, this isn't what I anticipated, and now I got nobody here to help me through it. So what do? I get all of that. But the contract is the contract, and you were on loan, and your season ended, and you came over. And that is what it is,
I think I say this, and I don't mean this to sound as callous as it's going to come out.
Okay.
I know that there is a human element to this, and I am acknowledging that.
Right.
If you are unable to fulfill the terms of your contract, maybe being an NHL hockey player is not for you.
I hear you.
I think there is a world where Kolosov, retires, whatever the terminology is. He makes it clear that he will not be coming to North America and just makes it as a KHL goalie. We've seen guys do it in the past. We've seen most of the time it's scandal driven, frankly. Carter Hartle signed with somebody any day now. Most of the time it's controversy driven, but like we've seen guys just bugger off to the KHL. Like we've seen it before. And if that is what he wants, if that is the solution to his homesickness, then maybe that's the play. But you have to let but in the meantime, you are under contract.
Right.
So either fulfill the contract or don't fulfill the contract, but do something. Be an adult. Like you signed it as an adult, make an adult decision.
Well, because to your point, if it was reversed and you want out that bad from the Russian side of it, you're like essentially having to flee the country just to get away from it, because they're going to sit there and tell you have a contract.
Sure.
Don't try any funny business. Right? That's the way that it would work.
Exactly. Right.
Like, and this was the thing that I had a problem with. Okay. And I'm not trying to bash or do anything like that, but this is where this came from, because this is happening. Now, by this point in time, again, this is the weekend after Mishkov shows up and has his introductory press conference. This is the weekend after Konechny signs his extension. Now it really feels like, by all accounts, all of the offseason stuff is over. Mishkov is here. Konechny's deal is signed. There's nothing left to really touch on. There shouldn't be, right?
One more thing, by the way. Sorry.
Yes.
just back on the Russian thing.
Yeah.
Has anybody asked Ivan Fedotov what he thinks?
I was about to get to it because this is where I'm trying, and this is why I said I don't want to bash him. I don't want to bash anything.
No, I'll
because
I'm not bashing, but
no,
frankly about a child.
No, you don't know what I mean by
I got you.
No, you don't know what I mean by I'm not trying to bash. You'll get to it you'll get it in a second. I was watching on, again, this is where I sit there and I go on, and when I check social, I sometimes just check for watching purposes and decide within like 10 minutes that I'm done with it, right? Because it's at a certain point, it's too tiring. It is by this point, like I said, by all accounts, all of the offseason stuff is over with. It is a Sunday afternoon in late July. Training camp does not start for another 2 months. Rookie camp is about 6 weeks away still, or something like that, 6-7 weeks away. And I am watching people go back and forth over a report that I'm sure has to have some validity to it because it comes from a reputable reporter, I should say.
Right.
And a story that goes and like kind of sensationalizes it. Here's what I'm talking about. Tony Androkidis, he writes this or puts out there, tweets out about how like this didn't like the way he was handled, blah, 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 all this stuff.
Right.
Philly.
And Tony, by the way, has covered the AHL forever, covered the Phantoms for a while.
Like, has sources, knows people, would be able to reputable say, I heard
the Elliot Friedman of the AHL. Like,
sure.
Okay. Just for people that might not know.
Right.
Okay. Anyway.
And that's just what that one thing said. In fact, right now I'm going to go and actually pull up his account to see the wording of it. Cause I don't even know if I bothered. Like, I was not even touching stuff with this. It's the team is going to tell you what do we know? As far as we know, he's coming.
There's a contract.
That's their answer. Right. So reports are reports in that situation. And I'm going to obviously I'm going to have to go back like a little bit because Tony keeps working over the offseason and getting like all these all these minor league.
The grind does not stop.
He had a really interesting story the other day, by the way, about how people may not view like the AHL as developmental as it was anymore.
I did see that.
It's a very interesting take and it's very worth discussion. So not when we're trying to catch up on 20,000.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm getting close to it because it was late July. Like I said, this is a Sunday afternoon-ish, right at the end of July. It's the last weekend of July, right? And this and it led to a very public kind of exchange between the two places of this.
Right.
Here it was, and this actually wasn't even the Sunday. This was the Saturday before, Saturday morning. Per AHL source, Alexei Kolosov told the Flyers at the end of his stint with Lehigh Valley he did not want to return. Quote, they put him in a hotel by himself and he felt isolated, especially since his English isn't great, which explains the deals that they made with Gahagan and Petrozelli, which is two other goalies that they brought in, which could go either way, by the way, still. It's like either they can be AHL level goalies who fill that spot, or they could be for Reading.
Right.
Who knows? Either way. So that's out there for a day, right? And pretty much that lingered. And Tony added a couple of things to that, by the way. So follow-up tweet. Put yourself in Kolosov's shoes for a minute. You're approximately 5,000 miles from home in a different country where you can't speak the native language or communicate with anyone. You're the third goalie getting minimal practice reps in the AHL. What do you do? What do you do the other 22 hours of the day? Okay. And then not to mention, you watch Ivan Fedotov go straight to the NHL with the Flyers and get a big contract extension shortly after the season ends. Now, he's just saying from the perspective, this is happening around this kid. If that's how it's going, then that's how you feel. Tony gets asked a question, follow up on Twitter later. How long was he isolated like that? Was it a week? Because the guy also came over and was 2 regular season games and then a not too long playoff run.
Right.
Like a lot of people, like there's 2 responses to this, right? There's 2 responses to this whole thing. And I'm not even to the second half of this, but there's 2 responses. It's either the kid's way too soft or how did the front office let something like this happen again? Right. There's really no gray area from the fan base. That's just the 2 knee-jerk reactions. The kid's too soft or how did you let this happen again? And it's either giving the kid the complete benefit of the doubt and saying, yeah, that sucks. That's terrible to do. How could you let this happen to him?
As is often the case online, it is completely black and white. There is no gray area or nuance at all.
Sure. Right. So Tony answers that, like, how long was it? And Tony answers, I'm thinking the feeling of being, quote, isolated was due to the lack of being able to communicate with anyone in his native language. Don't know for sure, but usually Phantom's new arrivals stay at the hotel directly attached to their home rink in downtown Allentown. I'm trying to see if there was anything like to follow up or whatever, but truth. Okay, so here was another, like, whatever. I'm like, to respond to that portion of it. They put all new arrivals in the hotel attached to the rink, and I'm positive they give all players their own rooms. I also clarified what the source meant by isolated shortly thereafter. Like, oh, and then he just cited that, like, not being able to communicate with somebody was what that means. Like, what he meant by isolated. Not like, hey, like, that, and this is where I'm going to get with the point, right? Because Tony, the next morning, as this goes on, it's early in the morning on Sunday. So this starts off a whole day of this. I kind of expected the irrational takes from fans, but man, some, quote, journalists took this bit of information I reported yesterday and really exaggerated the hell out of it for a cheap story for clicks, eh? You know, if you don't know which story it is, and again, this is why I said I don't want to bash, because I understand, like, the job structure. This was talked about extensively. But Philly Hockey Now put a story out, and John Bailey's the writer on it, put a story out and basically headlined it that they, quote, abandoned Kolosov. Now, here's all you need to know for how sensationalized that line is. Whether that's what you were told or not, I don't, maybe you were told that somewhere, but here's how sensationalized that becomes. The Flyers brought over a goalie last year for the first time over a year after anticipated because he left a rink from practicing in his home country and was literally detained by the military.
Kidnapped. Right.
And you want to use the word that in the United States, in Allentown, they abandoned this kid.
Right. We got a guy who was kidnapped and possibly poisoned by the Russian government. And okay. And you think being in a hotel room in Allentown for a couple of weeks with HBO is the same thing.
Right. And it just continued to, it's like, this turned into a very public thing, like this back and forth, whatever. And I finally, after watching tons of people, because it spread over to other aspects of like the media too. Like,
sure. Then
I'm seeing Jason Martinez have to put something out about what he feels like he knows about the situation going off of that. And Bill Meltzer's getting in on it a little bit and things like that. And they are using both sides of the equation. Obviously, like, they're taking some of what Tony reported, but also adding like what they've heard from within the Flyers organization, blah, blah, blah. And it just became one gigantic thing. And I finally got to, I shouldn't say I don't know, because I'll check the timestamp really quick, because I haven't been on Twitter a whole hell of a lot. Okay. So it's not hard for me to go back that far and find something compared to somebody who's actually like doing more than just one.
Yeah, most of your tweets these days are Phillies related.
They have been. Well, because I don't have any reason to get into the nuance. That's the thing. It's so nuanced to talk about what ifs, and I'm not like, sometimes it's fun to do that, like in hindsight. So this is finally 5:40 in the afternoon. Tony's tweet about people who really ran with this thing for clicks was 8:30 in the morning. Okay, it's 5:49. I finally just go, everyone on Flyers Twitter needs a freaking vacation.
Fair enough.
Like, because my point is I understand how this is a story, but guess what? One side's going to tell you, as far as we know, he's got a contract, and the intention is we're going to, we intend for him to show up, and we're going to talk to him and work with him. Right. And the other guy, the other side of the equation is making it seem like, okay, he doesn't want to come over here anymore, and there's a reason to get frustrated at the Flyers front office. There would be in that case, but you will not have a firm, definitive answer until
we know whether he shows up or not.
Until the second week of September, when rookie camp starts. If he is not there, now you've got a reason to sit there and say, what did you do to screw this one up if he's not there? Simple as that. But trying to come to terms with something that you don't even know to be completely fact yet at the end of July, when I was over at my in-laws that day while this is going on, They got a pool in the backyard. There's, everybody's out there. Her brother, my wife's brother is grilling. We're having a nice afternoon. We had the ball game on we pulled a TV outside, had the ball game on. It's a nice day. You're sitting around just having a nice, relaxing Sunday. Go do that. Like, instead of spending time on a social media platform going back and forth over a story that doesn't even have a resolution yet, go outside. Enjoy the last couple days of summer. It's July. It's not.
Kevin's official advice is go touch some grass.
Seriously, though. Because it was like seriously, you didn't there was no need to carry on a runaround all day on a Sunday afternoon in July over this.
Kevin, have you considered that people are bored?
Oh, I know people are bored because that's why they do it. And I'm just here to you know what? And listen, I don't have to, I'm not trying to give advice to people in that spot. I'm not trying to tell people what to do. You do you, but I'm going to do me. And I wasn't going to sit there on a Sunday in July and worry about a story like that. It wasn't it's not a non-story, but it's not something that's got a resolution that makes me feel like we got to sit here. Like the day that we find out he does not show up for something beyond,
then we have a story.
It's not even said that we have a story like that. He's not just that he's not there, but that's the day I'll sit down and I'll write something directed at the front office. That's like, hey, listen, this is 2 times within a calendar year that some kid doesn't want to play. Maybe you're part of the problem and something's got to be corrected. Now I've got reason to go there, but I don't over something that wasn't going to be resolved that day.
So I think you probably noticed I changed our tab on the YouTube channel because I think these two.
Oh, it gets into that a little bit.
Right. Because I think these two, circumstances are linked here. I think basically since 1967, the Flyers have never really rebuilt. They've never, not really. Like, obviously, there's been little 1 or 2 year projects here and there. There's never been a real dedicated long-term effort to, hey, we're going to reset the cupboard a little bit and we're going to start over.
Right. And
there certainly hasn't been anything like that since social media.
Right.
And I think to answer the question posed on the tab, can fans handle the Flyers rebuild path? No. But I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I don't think we should change things because fans can't handle it. Right? Like, I think if you're Danny Briere, I think you just kind of have to put your head down, ignore the noise, and I think he's doing good things.
It's not a matter of that, though. Okay. So, because I pushed the same, I reposted the same tweet and just added in there. Feels like a good day to throw this out there again. Literally earlier this week.
Okay.
Because more stuff was coming up about this. And
right.
and again, it was it's still August. You're still 3 weeks away from rookie camp. You're still not going to have a complete end. I watch people go from the story continues to evolve where all because it all started with because Danny Briere did Nasty Knuckles this week and said something about how Kolosov had changed agents and there's still stuff to discuss and they don't have a clear answer yet and blah, blah, blah. And that because of that stuff, it just sent it spiraling again. And it's
right.
We're still not there yet, though, on actually getting an answer. You might think that you know the answer, but we don't have it yet. So I'm not spending a day in August worrying about criticizing the Flyers front office or criticizing the kid or
right, because if he shows up
or whatever,
if he shows up day one, all these questions kind of go away
a little bit, and it'll always remain. But
sure.
And look, is part of this fueled by when Mishkov came over? There's this white glove treatment with him, where it's oh, by the way, you're the GM and the president of hockey operations went to the airport to go pick you up, and we brought you to the training facility, and within a couple weeks. He posts a picture on Instagram and his mom and his brother are over. And it's okay, there's clear dedication there.
And it looks like on the other end, an Uber picked up Kolosov at the airport and he sits by himself in his hotel room.
Right. And that's if that's really what happened, And that's what comes to be, and it makes this kid say, I'm not playing. Understandable. And you can criticize the Flyers for two things. One, creating that situation where he feels that way.
Right.
With no one to talk to or whatever. And two, for maybe not playing him more so it feels worth his while too. Like it goes hand in hand. You can feel isolated all you want to and be like, I don't really know who to talk to or how to communicate because it's a different language, but I get to play every third day, or I'm playing, 8 games.
Playing a game every weekend.
I'm playing 8 of the last 11 games, not 2 of the last 11, behind this other guy who's clearly older than me and clearly, isn't in the NHL right now and was. Right. So, maybe if I'm playing that much, I won't, I'm fine with it because it means I got work to do, but you're behind guys. So it was a different story. That's all I was trying to get at was like, it's not that it's not a non-story. It's not that it's not worth criticism of either Kolosov or the Flyers front office or both. Could be all things, everything all at once. It was just getting to me how like this was dominating all day over socials in the middle of the summer. And it's like, this isn't the NFL where like there is storylines every single day and it's going to drum up this big deal. How many people are like, seriously, I understand Cutter Gauthier is going to play for the Ducks this year and is going to probably make it. Like, we're going to see at some point, first NHL goal. We're going to see highlights potentially. If Kolosov just disappeared and played in Russia for the rest of his life, are people going to do that?
No. It's
only when it affects your team to that level where it's, he's now playing for someone else. Like,
every team has a list of 10,000 prospects that didn't make it.
Sure, but like what I mean by that is it matters right now because right now he factors into your plans.
Right now he's your third best goaltending,
and he's your best prospect goalie in terms of like the furthest along, possibly the best. That's all relevant.
I think Bjarnasen's probably the best, but like furthest along for sure.
See, I think it's Zavergan.
Fair enough.
I keep hearing really good things. Doesn't mean he's close. Doesn't mean
I was saying the thing about goaltending is until they show up and do it at the NHL level, it doesn't really matter.
But that's also just it. When Gauthier had what happened, and he gets traded, and the story keeps kind of evolving of what happened and why he didn't want to be a Flyer. He goes. Not only does he go immediately to a team that's going to play you twice a year, even though that doesn't sound as bad as like going to the Devils or something.
Right.
It's not just that. It's also he's probably he was going to sign right after his college year. He's playing in Boston. He's playing at Boston College. He just was the most outstanding player of World Juniors. It's all right there under your face. Yep. You can taste it at that point, right? It's like when you're waiting for the meal to come out at the restaurant. It's like, it's right there. I can see it. I'm ready for it. And now it's gone. This is over a kid who's played 2 professional games in North America
at the AHL level that most fans didn't watch. Let's be honest.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, Gauthier could be this really great player, and it wouldn't be shocking. And it was right there for you, and something happened. This is still something happened, but there are people who are out there acting like this is Marty Brodeur getting away. This is Patrick Waugh getting away.
Like, guys, he might be a good goalie, but he's a goaltending prospect. And what do we say about goaltending prospects all the time?
Yeah.
It's a bag of magic beans.
And that's all I'm saying. So your question about the handling the rebuild thing, because everything, as soon as, and I knew this was going to happen as soon as the Mishkov news came out.
Yeah.
That it was like, but I like at some point in time during this, and I don't remember at what point I had the question. I don't recall whether I said it here, whether I said it on 97.3. It doesn't matter. I said it somewhere. This was my worry when this all started. You had a big press conference. We were sitting here a little over a year ago. Big press conference, new era of Orange. And you made a very public statement about rebuilding. And you were going to ask for patience. And my question was, does this fan base have that in them?
No.
Well, hold on.
We told you that at the time.
And but it was my immediate thought after the draft, because you basically took a lot of what 2024 was going to be and looked at your cap situation, looked at the draft class in general, and said, we're going to focus in on 2025. That's go time. That's when we're going to go all in. And that means this is another season of what you see is what you get. And sure, they'll have Matvei Mishkov, and that's exciting, but it is virtually the only difference between last season and this season. Everything else is the same.
And if last year's team missed the playoffs by 15, 20 points, I think the conversations. It's not a big deal. Yep. I think the conversations this offseason are very different. But the fact that you're in the playoff race until game 81, it makes it harder to swallow what many fans perceive to be at best a step sideways and what is probably a step back.
Right. And look, patience is not something the city of Philadelphia does well with sports. They want everything now. They want success. They want a chance at championships. And so it's kind of, it's close to your point, because you're sitting here saying, what if they were 15, 20 points out last year anyway, and nothing really changes? Then nothing really changes, right? I feel like it's easier to take if Mishkov isn't coming.
Absolutely agree.
If you sat there and also said, we're running it back, we were close to, take out the 15 to 20 point part. We were close to the playoffs last year, but we're running it back with the exact same kind of happy-go-lucky upstart group that defied some odds, but they don't have that high-end talent piece that's going to come at some point. So you have Mishkov staying in Russia for another season. You have a lot of picks for 2025. You're freeing up money in the offseason. I think everybody gets it at that point. You're running it back because Mishkov's in Russia. 2025 draft has a lot of picks. Money's getting freed up. It all starts to add up. But that's now not the case. And that's not to fault the part of Mishkov coming over, because there were doubts that would ever happen. So if it's set up to happen, you get the kid signed and you get him over here.
Get him over here.
But the only way you were going to make changes to the roster was through a trade. And they didn't make any trades. And then you start to wonder, why is that? Is it, it can't be because there's no trade market whatsoever, because think about and I picked this one a few months back before, right around when we did our last show. But how does Matt Savoy, who was a 9th overall pick in the draft in 22, get moved for Ryan McLeod when you have Scott Lawton on the roster?
Yep.
How are you not trying to make that happen?
Right.
And that's what I think gets people frustrated. You take Scott Lawton, Travis Konechny, and Joel Farabee. Those were the three names that kept coming up all offseason. Why do those three names keep coming up? One,
they're the tradable names. Yeah.
There should be a market. Bingo. Lawton has
they're the tradable assets.
Lawton's got a manageable contract, great in the room, serviceable bottom six forward. Konechny puts up 30 goals consistently, spark plug of a player, a pest, a leader, manageable contract for one more season with the negotiating rights at the time. Farabee, maybe a bit of a high price tag contract-wise for production, but he's only 24. So there are markets for guys like that. Number two is what I like to call the Claude Giroux effect. When you've been around for 6, 7, 8 years or more, and you're basically associated with nothing more than barely making the playoffs and first round exits and otherwise a bunch of bad seasons where you miss the playoffs, that's what you become known for. And that's how your career is defined.
Especially in the city of Philadelphia. I had to fight with people every single day about, the captain's useless.
And I can understand being hesitant on 24-year-old Joel Farabee in the midst of a rebuild, that you may not want to move a guy who's 24. And I can understand that Konechny teetered the timeline of, he fits it, he doesn't, is it right, is it wrong? We went back and forth with that all off season. But there kind of was no excuse for Lawton, right? If Lawton was potentially available, at least you were supposedly listening, and someone offered you, say, a first-round pick or equivalent prospect, there's really no reason to keep on the team a 30-year-old forward.
I have always said, and will continue to say, I think Scott Lawton is the room guy of this organization.
Well, sure he is. And look, I thought Danny Briere did a good job at preparing this team for 2025 to an extent, for the offseason. I look at the money that's set to come off the books. I look at the draft picks. That part makes sense. I know people don't like being patient, but I understood the patience play. But it's almost like in the span of a handful of weeks from positioning yourself for the 2025 draft and free agency is coming and you start acquiring all these first round picks and stuff, that Danny Briere managed to piss off people on both sides of the equation.
Which means he's probably doing a pretty decent job.
It could be, but like if you wanted them to blow it up, open up a bunch of spots, make trades, free up cap, set the thing up for a tank. Well, you didn't get that. You got run it back and probably finished about 10th from the bottom.
Right.
And if you wanted them to take the opposite approach and say, this team nearly made the playoffs last season. Game 82 mattered. You missed the playoffs by 4 points.
That you probably could have had.
That you sure. Well, not even that part of it. Forget how many points they missed the playoffs by. It's you had 9 games to go and you were holding the spot and the schedule supposedly got easier and you couldn't finish. That was the bottom line, right? If you wanted to take that information, nearly making the playoffs last season, and do something to slightly further that, you also got run it back. So you got the same good old stuck in the middle Flyers. I don't think that means that you can't get out from that from where you pick as a result. We already brought that up, but I understand the frustration in that. You just finished and got the 12th pick, which you turned into the 13th pick via trade. That's where you picked 12th, 13th, right? What are you holding on to Scott Lawton for? To fall just short of the playoffs again? Is that what you extended Nick Seeler for? Is that why you gave Garnet Hathaway a 2-year extension? Because finishing 10th to 14th is good enough in the rebuild years. When that's been your identity for a decade, it's hard to shake. And as much as I feel like Danny Briere deserves far more than 2 off seasons and 1 regular season to show you what this plan is all about, I understand why there are doubters. Because I said it before, there are trust issues between the fan base and the franchise. Even if Danny Briere has done nothing wrong, even if Keith Jones isn't at fault for the mess that they inherit, you've gone through Paul Holmgren, Ron Hextall, Chuck Fletcher, the Dave Scott era of ownership, and you've been burned badly.
Yep.
And at the first sign that you don't understand what the plan is, at the first sign that you feel like things aren't changing, you are ready to pounce because you've had it. It's been 50 years since the team won a Stanley Cup. The last decade in particular has been abysmal in terms of franchise management.
I was going to say, when's the last time they won 2 rounds?
Preaching patience. Was it 2010?
2010?
No, won 2 rounds, yes.
Yeah.
Made it to the second round would be, well, if you want to consider.
Well, they made it in 2020.
But I was more accurately going to say 2012 when they dominated the Penguins in that playoff series.
Right. Then, so you're looking at 1 series win in the last 10 plus years.
Since 2013.
Yeah. In 12 years.
So preaching patience. So preaching patience is a hard sell, especially when you are doing next to nothing and everyone is very active. Now, I also have, it's funny, I have that reaction where I go, I understand why you're frustrated. 50 years without a cup, over a decade of just pure embarrassment in terms of how to run a franchise.
Yep.
It only has started to recover because it had to go to the ownership level to do so. That it had to take Dave Scott walking away in retirement and Dan Hilferty coming over and actually being a presence to start to convince you a little bit that maybe things are changing a little bit because he's around and Jonesy's going to get it because Jonesy knows, the franchise.
He's just been around
the franchise forever, so he knows it better than anybody. And then you hope that Danny Briere is as edgy of a GM as he was a player and can be a little bit of a sleuth in that way, just kind of find a way to do things that people don't expect. And
like secretly sneak a Russian kid into your facility right before the draft and then take him 7th overall.
Sure, stuff like that. But
just saying.
But also the lack of like if I'm going to sit here, I sit here and also watch stuff that is just pointless back and forth banter on the verge of arguing with other people, through social media and things like that. And just voicing your frustration about, if you sit there and throw your hands up and go, this Kolosov thing, oh my goodness, another kid who doesn't want to play. Nobody wants to play for this team. This front office is a disgrace and this whole franchise is a disgrace. Then if that's then if you're hitting your breaking point, pick another team.
Yep.
Do what's healthy for you. If you want to be dedicated to the team, I'm not saying patience is supposed to be easy, but, and I'm not saying that you're not supposed to be frustrated with them. That's That's your dollars, right? Like when you go and pay for a ticket to go to the game, that's your dollars that you invest into. I want to go watch this team play. I don't want to go watch a team that I don't feel like I can support.
And if they haven't earned your money, do not spend it on them. Do not give it to them.
Right. Well, because that's the choice that you make as a fan. That's why we one of the things we talked about from last year from the last show we did till now, but it had to do with last year to this year, was a bunch of people who did get back on the season ticket plans or who just have them in general. I think Dan Hilferty said something along the lines of 95% had renewed right around the time that either that the Mishkov news had come out or close to or something like that.
Absolutely.
Or something like that. It was close. I don't even think it had to do with Mishkov, and then Mishkov was going to come over and you knew they were going to sell whatever they had left.
Oh yeah.
Because
it's something to be excited about.
I get that. What I'm saying is that that's like, sure, if people are willing to invest and that's what you want to put your money into, then put your money into it. I'm not telling you not to.
How did that building look the last year of Dave Haxtell's reign? Empty. The answer is empty, Kevin.
Well, yeah, I know, because you're talking about it was 18-19, so it was the year before AV. So 18-19 was okay, and then right after, like, we got a glimpse of it, right? That 19-20 year, it was starting to be fun. The building was filling up. There was a vibe.
You talk about the Flyers getting derailed by COVID and all, maybe being the most affected, and I'll give you all of that. Man, Alain Vigneault got boned.
Oh, for sure. And
boned.
But that's the point I'm making. It was then that changed things, because then, not only were you on track for the coaches eventually going to get fired, before that ever happened, it was the tail end of that 56 game season. You could only have 3,500, 5,000 fans in the building, maybe.
Yep.
And you were struggling with that.
And you couldn't fill that, right? Like, oh. Yep. I went to a bunch of games in 18-19 because they were dirt cheap. All right. So we've spent a lot of time talking about guys who don't want to play for the Flyers. Let's talk about somebody who pretends to, but might not.
Yeah, the last.
So the last little bit of news that we have to talk about before we get out of here. I know we've gone kind of long, but it's been like 2 months since our last show. So
yeah, I know, right?
The news here that came out kind of this week and kind of flared a lot of this conversation up, I think, is Ryan Johansen was placed on waivers for purposes of a buyout, which is unusual.
Terminating the contract, correct?
Yep. The Flyers used the term material breach of contract
which is not something you hear every day.
No, not something you hear every day. Not something you hear every day without like criminal charges, right? Like when it was
not something you hear. Yeah. So let's expand upon that statement as you go. Not something you hear every day. Not something you hear typically without like some serious grounds to do so. Yes. Not something you hear in August for sure.
Fair.
Like it's probably the last thing you're thinking of in August. Like that showed up.
And this situation's a bit tricky, right? Because basically since the Flyers acquired the Ryan Johansen contract,
it's tricky for a lot of reasons.
It was expected that something like this was going to be the end result. There's talk that the Flyers were looking to either LTIR him or like medically void the contract, basically. And
yes,
Johansen kind of fought back against that. Long story short, there's a lot of funky stuff here. Somebody's shady. Somebody's full of it. And I don't know if it's the Flyers or Johansen or maybe a little bit of both, but there is definitely some nonsense being thrown around here.
So there's a lot of fun nuggets that are absolutely 1,000% confirmable because you can just look them up. This is how easy this part is.
Ryan Johansen hates John Tortorella. Check.
Okay, but that wasn't where I was even going to go with it.
I'm joking. I know.
But Ryan Johansen. Well, you're right about that though. There was a history involved. That's true. But Ryan Johansen gets acquired by the Flyers at this trade deadline as part of the Sean Walker trade. So again, very much in the same. It's one of the things I love about this whole thing would be a really fun trade tree because this starts with Ivan Provorov to the Columbus Blue Jackets. that has elements of that going to the LA Kings. The LA Kings send Sean Walker and Cal Peterson to the Flyers. Cal Peterson's going to basically, for pretty much the whole thing of this, reside in the minors with the exception of a few spot starts that, well, I shouldn't
didn't go well.
Hold on. No, actually I should say this differently. With the exception of 2 spot starts, one that went well, one that didn't.
Yep.
Before going right back down because everybody was healthy again until all of a sudden, oh, wait, the Carter Hart thing comes to a head. Now we need another goalie. So now we're going to try with him as the backup. That didn't work. Back down to the minors you go, and that's where you're going to stay. And pretty much at this point, because they let the buyout period go by the wayside, they're going to pretty much ride that out, the Peterson one. He's going to be here. That'll clear later. Okay. So that was the one element of it. And you have to take a contract like Cal Peterson's if you want to get somebody's first round pick, which in this case, by the way, turned out to be Oliver Bonk.
Right.
Also part of the trade was Sean Walker, who then you took and flipped the next trade deadline to Colorado to get their first round pick in 25. So you've now taken one piece of this trade and added 2 players, or added 2 first round picks, just with one piece involved in both as a common thread. Now, to get a first round pick, though, it's not that simple. The Flyers also threw in a 5th round pick in 2026 and got Ryan Johansen back to sweeten this thing up a little bit. No retention involved, so the Flyers take on the $4 million that was left on the contract after retention from the trade from Nashville to Colorado. And this is March 6th. Seemingly, on March 6th, the intention was going to be, it could be a couple things. It could have been, let's see if they don't just decide to play him. They could play him on the NHL roster. Now, there's a lot of thought. There's a lot of thought behind what you brought up, the Torts relationship, and also just generally speaking, this is a guy who has now played for, at that point, this would be his 4th team.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you're talking from Columbus to Nashville to Colorado to Philly. Is this another locker room that you want him to be in?
Right.
When your locker room is heavily based on, well, we're going to keep Nick Seeler because he's a good locker room guy, and we've kept Scott Lawton for this long because he's a good locker room guy, and we're going to inject Ryan Johansen into that locker room while they're in.
We bought out Kevin Hayes and Tony DeAngelo to help make our locker room better.
Right. And you're going to do it also, by the way, at a time when you are really in the heart of a playoff race. Like, you're legit holding one of the spots.
And the points are starting to slip away a little bit. Right.
A little. And so, okay, what's the other alternative? Bury him in the minors. Well, the story, that the way that I've perceived it to be is that upon hearing that was the plan, Johansen made it that, or at least stated at that time, he's injured. So now you can't send him down. So he just becomes another, injured part of the NHL roster. And to be honest, I don't think it was that big of a deal because you can kind of justify getting to a certain point in the season and saying, hey, listen, I'm banged up. Doctors did look at him, by the way. That was confirmed also. Doctors did look at him, and there is an injury of sorts. And I think the Flyers didn't make a big deal out of this because at the time there was 19 games left in the season?
Right.
Like, there's a certain element of what's left that you're like, if he doesn't play, he doesn't play. There's nothing to go crazy over. But using the injury, like, most people will go out after the season is over. And if they need a surgery, they will get the surgery so that, especially if you don't make the playoffs, then you're getting the surgeries done in April.
You're getting them done right away to be ready for next season, be ready for off-season training, etc.
So the day that your agent, who is also happens to be the same agent as Cutter Gauthier, nice little wrinkle there, puts out a statement going, oh, like, they have no grounds to do this. He is injured and he has a surgery scheduled. So you have a surgery scheduled for an injury that kept you out in March for the rest of the regular season, scheduled for August.
Right. Why?
Right before training camp, like within 2 to 3 weeks of training camp. Why?
That's right. Why wasn't it done 4 months ago?
That's the first part. Ready for another part of the equation?
Okay.
Go check Ryan Johansen's game log.
Oh no.
Because what date did I say the
March
trade
6th,
was?
I think.
Yes. So if you go check his game log for last season, you go through and you find that Ryan Johansen played 10 minutes and 58 seconds on March 4th against Chicago. 2 nights before the trade. Played.
Interesting.
Seemed like everything was fine.
Did he leave that game with an injury or anything that might indicate that, he had suffered a severe career-ending injury?
I don't know about, well, okay. Here's the thing. He played fewer minutes than he had recently. Like, they played Chicago in the last game of February, and he played 15-27 and had 18 shifts. In this game, he had 13. Now, I could go look at the box score from the 29th.
Yeah, I'm not that worried about it.
No, not about when his last shift was. Okay. And see, like, was there somebody absent that like now showed back up, and it's like, well, now this guy's gonna play. Like if I don't know, I'll just pick a name off the list that is worth it. And he played on the 29th, so it doesn't matter. But let's just say Jonathan Drouin. Was Jonathan Drouin hurt at the end of February and then comes back? Johansson still gets to play on March 4th. Role
gets cut, right?
But now Drouin's getting some minutes somewhere else. So now Johansson, because in fairness, Johansson's minutes from 15-27 dropped the next game on March 2nd to 11:48. So the ice time lines up, but the shift number does not. The shift number dropped by 5 in that game. So he had 5 fewer shifts and hadn't had a game with that few shifts since like maybe at all that season. It might have been the fewest he played all season. So that is a little telling, but that could be down to game situation. Colorado won the game that he played 15 minutes in and had 18 shifts against Chicago, 5-0. They also won the game on March 4th, 5-0. So, do with that what you will.
Sure. But regardless, so we got a guy who...
Okay, now the only other thing, and again, this PHLY had a little bit of this week as well, because talking about this situation, Charlie O'Connor brought up that apparently he also took morning skate the day of the trade. Now, that's interesting, because if you were on the ice the day of the trade, now, I don't know if that means you were going to play. It may not have mattered. I have no clue. Let's put it this way. I highly doubt there was a market for you specifically.
Right.
You were traded because a first-round pick was involved.
Right. You were added because somebody
said, not because somebody said, I got Sean Walker and like I'll take a first and I want a player too.
Right.
It was, if we're going to throw somebody in, they're going to throw in that guy. Part of the complication here is, first of all, it now has to go through a process.
Right.
If it was as simple as everything lines up, there is no legal to this side of things, they're just terminating the contract, then the whole contract disappears. $4 million off the books from one day to the next.
Yep.
The one question that comes up is, and there's been a little discussion about what happens to the other $4 million that Nashville still has as part of it. And I know that there are answers to that. And I haven't gone into like that part of it.
I believe that goes away.
If it was completely gone, I think you're right. But again, it comes down to, is there part of it? Like, let's put it this way.
That's fair, right.
A grievance is going
to the grievance is.
Well, a grievance is going to be filed, and pretty much every time that a grievance is filed on something like this, the end result is a settlement that doesn't either before an arbitrator or
it doesn't affect what player that team ends up on. Like, he's not going to get put back on the Flyers.
Right.
The contract is probably not going to be reinstated.
That's probably the one certainty we have is Ryan Johansen's not playing a game for the Flyers. That is abundant.
Now that you've said that, the arbitrator's coming out tomorrow and
putting him back on.
Yeah, it's buying him a house in Voorhees.
I know. I don't think it can go like that. Like, in other words, I think what it is you're either going to get paid the contract in full despite that. Like, oh, by the way, something else that was really kind of funny, by the way. So the guy has the reported injury is a hip injury, right?
Okay.
Ryan Johansen got married like a couple weeks ago. And there was a video on Instagram of him just absolutely tearing it up out there, having a grand old time. And,
Your Honor, we'd like to submit the
like seriously
Instagram story.
And maybe the injury isn't that bad that like you can't do that. I get it. It's not playing.
Right. There's a difference between playing hockey, right?
Right.
And doing the Macarena.
Exactly. But like, you get my point, right? Like, it's just there's like the social media world of something like this, where it's like, oh, by the way, that video from your wedding, we could use that.
Now, how much nonsense did GMs get away with in the 70s, 80s, 90s? Oh my God.
I always love stories in hindsight, right? Of stuff like things that happen where you're like, there's a backstory to this. And I totally did this day when they told you I was injured.
Right.
You know, like, oh, he's day to day. Yeah. And I actually did this instead. Like, it was just so I could get out of this.
Yeah. Thing. And I saw him at the trampoline park in Deptford.
Yeah, right.
All right.
The trampoline park. I love it.
Basically the end result here is most likely going to be that
he doesn't play,
or all of that money disappears, and then Ryan Johansen will be free to sign somewhere. Ryan Johansen will be free to sign somewhere else if he so desires.
It just comes down to what percentage of the contract they choose to continue to honor,
if any.
Because let's put it this way: the grievance is over. I didn't do anything wrong in my eyes, and you're going to deny me essentially $8 million.
Sure.
Even if it was just even if it was just the 4 on the Flyers end.
Ryan Johansen,
$4 million.
Ryan Johansen's filing for unemployment, and his application got bounced.
Well, like, let's just say it's no different than Ryan Ellis, is it?
Nope.
Like, not that there's a grievance to be filed or anything like that, but Ryan Ellis's thing is he's not retiring.
Man, I got it.
Why should? Why? But seriously, I have a contract. Somebody traded for the contract. I got hurt. I can't play. I'm owed the money.
Pay me my contract.
Yeah, I'm owed the money. Why would I do a buyout? Why would I do anything else? I want the money.
If you took morning skate the day of your shirt or the day of the trade and then got married and were ripping it up at the wedding, what's the truth?
In fairness, I can actually almost understand the wedding thing because it was August.
I mean, fair.
Like, that's valid. It's not April that you.
Yeah, but why do you have a surgery scheduled?
That's the bigger one to me.
Right?
Is who sits? Like, listen. If you don't have to get a surgery, you don't want to get a surgery. I get that. But I don't something doesn't sound right about I have surgery scheduled.
My future wife didn't want me to get the surgery before the wedding.
But maybe. But even if that's the case, it's like you're a professional athlete.
Right.
Like even
right. I mean, just tell her that, hey, listen, I'm going to try to be in the NHL next year. I'm getting this surgery in March or April.
It's not even that part of the equation. You get the surgery in April. You should be theoretically okay to just have a good time at your wedding. You're not. Nobody asked you to play. Nobody asked you to play a 3 and 5.
Kevin, I would just like to remind you that there are more hip-related activities around a wedding than just dancing at the wedding.
I don't think that's affecting that much either, is there?
You know what? That is fair. Regardless,
I'm going from playing a sport at a professional level to much more mundane activity that everybody can, like, the common person who's not an athlete does those things too, whether, at a wedding and after the fact.
Right. Regardless.
And on that note,
that's a good place to end on this one. That's a good summer show ending right there.
Oh my goodness.
I'll be honest with you folks, the listeners here. We have not really talked schedule yet. We might still be in summer schedule here. We will be back.
We're very close.
Yes, we will definitely be back with a show at or around the start of training camp, kind of when things get in the swing. In the meantime, Kevin and I are going to log off here and go figure out the schedule and get stuff moving. In the meantime, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including at sportstalkphilly.com and everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, you know the drill by now. It's been a while since I've done this outro. I'm a little bit rusty. We got a little bit of summer vibes going. It's been about a month and a half, 2 months since our last show. It will not be that long before the next one. I promise you that.
Absolutely.
So follow us everywhere. We are just a couple of weeks away from the season getting started. And man, I don't know about you, but I'm getting excited. So, all right, Kevin, anything else you got for us here?
Nope.
All right. Sounds good. And until then, one more thing. Until then.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me?
All right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We'll see ya.